Chapter 354. Not long after Nie Wuxiang left, Mo Tiange stood up and put away her things. Although Nie Wuxiang had left, there were two nascent soul cultivators in Tianyan sect. What if they had some divine ability they didn't know about and found out? She might as well leave now before Tianyan sect suspected her. She entered the virtual sky world, put Xiaohua and Xiaofan into the spiritual beast bag, put away her magic weapons and other things one by one, and finally removed the formation of the cultivation room. Ayan. Upon hearing her voice, Ayan, who was watering the flowers outside the room, ran over. Nie Wuxiang left in front of her just now, but she didn't notice at all. "Fairy, what's your order?" "I'm leaving," Mo Tiange said gently. She took out several spirit stones from her robe and gave them to her. "These days you've served me very well. These spirit stones are your reward. I've already paid enough for the room. After I leave you just need to report to the shopkeeper." Ayan was stunned. "Fairy, you're leaving so soon? I've comprehended some profound principles during my cultivation these days, so I have to go back to inland Yunzhong first. We'll meet again if fate wills it." Mo Tiange said goodbye to her with a smile, then left the small courtyard. "Fairy." Ayan chased after her with the spirit stones in her hands. She wanted to thank her, but she found that there was no one outside the courtyard. She sighed regretfully and turned back silently. As a maid in this inn, she rarely met cultivators who were so easy to serve. She even gave her a lot of spirit stones before she left. She didn't know if she would have the chance to see her again in the future. After leaving the inn, Mo Tiange walked towards the free market. She had already inquired about the transporting formations to leave North Pole Island. There were several transporting formations on North Pole Island, and most of them were controlled by cultivation sections. Even if they didn't belong to any sect in name, they were more or less related to those sections. In other words, no matter which transporting formation she took, it was impossible to avoid Tianyan sect. Therefore, Mo Tiange chose the transporting formation belonging to Tianyan sect in the free market. Since she couldn't avoid it, she just borrowed the one belonging to Tianyan sect. Nie Wuxiang had already left. As long as she didn't show the slightest bit of guilt, Tianyan sect presumably wouldn't notice anything. He went to the Jade Pavilion with familiarity and greeted the cultivator who came to receive him. Then, with the guidance of the cultivator, he arrived at another hall where people were coming and going. This hall was much smaller than the one in the free market, and there were far fewer people here. After all, the teleportation fee wasn't cheap. Low-level cultivators often had to save up for a long time before they could even afford a single teleportation. As soon as Mo Tiange entered the hall, she sensed a cultivator's divine sense sweeping past her body. In a split second, her fine hair stood on end. She unconsciously became vigilant, because this divine sense belonged to a nascent soul cultivator. Tianyan sect's nascent soul cultivators had really set out? Mo Tiange was rather astonished. What exactly did Nie Wuxiang steal? Since it was placed in the Jade Pavilion, it shouldn't be important enough for a nascent soul cultivator to come out and search for it, right? Although Mo Tiange had a lot of questions in her heart, her expression didn't change. Like the other cultivators, she walked to the transporting formation to register. Upon seeing that she was a core formation cultivator, the aura refining disciple in charge of registration respectfully asked her to wait on the side. The several foundation building cultivators who were in charge of the formation, however, stared at her with vigilance as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile and pretended she didn't feel anything. While waiting, she leisurely sipped her tea. Tianyan sect seemed to be quite wealthy. The tea leaves served to guests in Jade Pavilion were unexpectedly so rich in spiritual aura. After a while, someone hurriedly came out of the inner wing and walked towards her. Mo Tiange raised her head to look and smiled. What a coincidence, it was unexpectedly that Madame Chizu again. Upon seeing her, Madame Chizu also smiled without saying anything. The two of them greeted each other with great tacit understanding. "Fellow Taoist Chizu." "Fellow Taoist Qingwei." After greeting each other, Madame Chizu asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Qingwei, are you leaving North Pole Island? Why don't you stay for a few more days?" Mo Tiange answered with a smile, "I suddenly had an epiphany while cultivating recently, so I need to go back to inland Yunzhong as soon as possible. Fated chances wait for no man. Although I haven't strolled around North Pole Island enough, I have no choice but to leave." "I see." No cultivator would doubt this reason. For cultivators, nothing was more important than fated chances. Mo Tiange looked around, then asked with a hint of curiosity, "Fellow Taoist Chizu, could it be that you still haven't found that thief?" Although there were no core formation cultivators at the scene, These foundation-building cultivators nervously checked the cultivators who left. There were also nascent soul cultivators overseeing the scene. Once they found a core formation cultivator, Madame Chizu even came out to personally check. This was an extraordinarily grand display. Emo Chienga couldn't help but worry. Although Nye Wuxiang was only disguised as a cultivator who went to sea, presumably they also checked her, right? She wondered if she passed. Madame Chizu smiled helplessly. Yes, my nascent soul martial uncle from my sect ordered us to carefully check all the cultivators who left North Pole Island during this period of time. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, you don't mind, right? Emo Chienga was worried, but her expression was indifferent. She said, Fellow Daoist, please go ahead and check. I just hope you can let me leave as soon as possible. If I miss this fated chance, I don't know when the next one will be. That's natural, Madame Chizu readily agreed, then said, Fellow Daoist Qingwei, please. Emo Chienga stood up and followed Madame Chizu into an empty wing room. Madame Chizu took out a jade plate, circled Emo Chienga, and carefully examined it twice. In the end, she heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, All right, fellow Daoist can go and handle the formalities. Upon hearing this, Emo Chienga's tense nerves relaxed. She felt the divine sense entangling her finally dissipate. She still had the same expression on her face as she cupped her hands and bowed to Madame Chizu. Fellow Daoist Chizu, I'll take my leave now. Until we meet again. Until we meet again. It's really not a good time for me to meet fellow Daoist. My sect just happened to have a major event. If fellow Daoist comes to North Pole Island again in the future, I'll play the role of a host. Madame Chizu walked her to the transporting formation and told the disciple guarding it to waive her teleportation fee. The two of them exchanged pleasantries again before they formally said their goodbyes. With Madame Chizu's permission, the attitude of the several foundation-building cultivators guarding the transporting formation immediately became much more polite. They asked respectfully, May I know where Senior wants to be teleported to? Emo Chienga smiled and asked, How many places can your transporting formation teleport to? Senior, our transporting formation teleports to 3 places: Eastern Tang State, Southern Zhou State, and Northern Lin State. Emo Chienga said, To Eastern Tang State. Is it directly teleported to the capital? No. The foundation-building cultivator spread the map and pointed at Eastern Tang State. Senior, please take a look. Our teleportation location is here. It's called Sky Snow City. Here? Emo Chienga mumbled, It seems a bit far. The foundation-building cultivator showed an apologetic expression. The capital is too far and the teleportation fee is too high. However, there's also a transporting formation in Sky Snow City, so it should be very convenient for Senior to return to the sect. Emo Chienga knew he misunderstood, but she didn't explain. It would be advantageous for her if others thought she was a cultivator from Eastern Tang State. If they knew she came from the distant celestial pole, who knew whether someone would want to get something from her out of curiosity? She nodded. All right, Sky Snow City it is. Chapter 355. This was a city located in the northern part of Yunzhong. The snow-white city walls were made of a special kind of white stone. The rows of buildings in the city were all made of stone without exception. Under the clear blue sky, there was a city that was as white as snow. The white was distinct and the blue was clear. Looking at the beautiful scene in front of her, Emo Chienga couldn't help but sigh. No wonder this city was called Sky Snow City. The blue sky and white snow really lived up to its name. Senior, do you want a map? A detailed map of Sky Snow City, including all cultivators' immortals' caves that can be rented and the market square's location. Senior, are you looking for someone or traveling? Do you need a guide? Senior. As soon as she came out of the transporting formation, Emo Chienga was surrounded by a group of people who introduced her to various things. There were many cultivators coming and going. Although most of them were aura-refining cultivators, it still made her sigh. Yunzhong was indeed a holy land for cultivation. It wasn't like a cultivation city like Kuanzhong City, which also had such an atmosphere. In the end, she just bought a map of Sky Snow City and sent the others away. Although Sky Snow City wasn't the capital of Eastern Tang, it was still a big city. According to the map, this city had a history of more than 10,000 years. Because there was a white stone mountain nearby, the city was built with mountain stones. The city was like snow, so it was called Sky Snow City. It was said that the white stones of Sky Snow City were extremely hard, like jade, and had the function of gathering spiritual aura. Although they were far inferior to spirit stones, they were better than nothing. Therefore, there were many middle and low-level cultivators living in this city. They called the white stones white spirit stones and jokingly called the houses they lived in spirit stone houses, which was very interesting. At the same time, Mo Chenga also discovered that Sky Snow City itself had a medium-sized spirit vein. Coupled with the function of white spirit stones, although it wasn't enough to build a sect, it was a blessed land for many individual cultivators. It was no wonder that so many individual cultivators gathered in this city. After leaving Tianyan Sect Station, Mo Chenga thought for a moment and decided to find a place to stay first. Among the 5 great sects of Eastern Tang, Wuxing Valley was remote, Pufa School was in the west, Jingshu School was near the capital, Danxia Sect was in the north, and Juyin Sect happened to be not far from Sky Snow City. Mo Chenga's primary purpose in coming to Yunzhong was to travel. Her secondary purpose was to go to Danxia Sect to investigate and find traces of Mo Yaoqing as well as the complete art of Sunu. However, Danxia Sect was, after all, a great cultivation group in Yunzhong, and Mo Yaoqing was a trader, so it was unwise to ask her directly. They could only slowly get in touch with her and slowly figure things out. Therefore, under the current circumstances, it would be better for him to stay in Sky Snow City first, get in touch with the people of the Jiyin sect, and find out more about the situation of the Dawning Pill sect. Sky Snow City was originally built on a mountain, and the entire city was built on White Stone Mountain. Whether it was the city walls or the houses, they were all made from local materials. Thus, the direction of the city was also uneven. Mo Chenga followed the map and headed towards the mountainside. According to the map, the majority of Sky Snow City was the property of the Ling clan, the largest cultivation clan in the Jiyin sect. The Ling clan was located at the top of White Rock Mountain, occupying the area with the densest spirit qi. At the bottom of the mountain there were many cave dwellings. These cave dwellings were of different sizes and had different spiritual qi. They were all for rent. Rogue cultivators who came to Sky Snow City would rent cave dwellings from the Ling clan regardless of whether they were staying for a long time or for a short period of time. When she reached the mountainside, Mo Chenga looked at the map then turned left according to the directions on the map. This White Rock Mountain was obviously a mine. There was very little vegetation here, there was only a small amount of yellow soil and some drought-resistant shrubs. Mo Chenga thought that the cultivators of Sky Snow City should be lacking in spiritual plants, right? She wondered what they used to concoct medicinal pills. As she was walking, she suddenly felt a spiritual aura fluctuation. Mo Chenga's gaze shifted, but she continued to walk forward as if nothing had happened. When she passed by a shrub, spiritual aura suddenly fluctuated above her head. A golden net came down from above, covering her completely in an instant. Ha 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 ha. Seeing that she couldn't move and was covered by the golden net, 2 cultivators came out from behind the mountain rock. One of them laughed. "Big brother, I told you no one could escape our inescapable net. What do you think?" These 2 cultivators were both in the foundation building realm. One of them had a messy beard on his face, so his appearance couldn't be seen clearly. The other had shifty eyes and looked very wretched. He was the one who spoke. The former was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm while the latter was in the early stage. The big man with the messy beard was very cautious. He frowned and reminded them, "Don't be arrogant. This person's cultivation level is higher than ours. No matter how high his cultivation level is, he still can't break the inescapable net, right?" The wretched man stared at Mo Chenga trapped in the golden net with a smile. He licked his lips and said, "Big brother, this woman looks pretty good. Look, don't talk nonsense." Before he could finish, the big man with the beard reprimanded him. "We stopped this robbery because we had no other choice. It's fine if we get the money. Have you forgotten the commandments?" "Commandments?" The wretched man snorted disdainfully. He was very dissatisfied. "Big brother, have you forgotten that we've been driven out? We're individual cultivators now. What does the commandments have to do with us?" The big man with the beard's eyes flashed. He then said with a heavy voice, "Whether we've been driven out or not, we still want to continue cultivating, so we can't forget the commandments. Aren't you afraid of the inner demon of core-formation?" Upon hearing this, the wretched man was finally persuaded. He said reluctantly, Okay, I understand." Right after he finished speaking, he saw Mo Chenga struggling in the golden net. He squinted his eyes and teased her with a smile, "Miss, don't struggle anymore. This is an inescapable net, a magic weapon. Although your cultivation level is higher than ours, once you're trapped in the inescapable net, you'll still be trampled on." Mo Chenga stopped struggling and stared coldly at the 2 men. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" The wretched man stroked his mustache and stared at Mo Chenga's face with a covetous gaze. Hand over your Chenkuan bag. Mo Chenga didn't move. She just stared at them. Seeing that she didn't move for a long time, the wretched man became impatient. He pulled the knot in the net and said, "Hurry up or I'll also rob you. Junior Marshal brother." Right after he finished speaking, the big man with the beard shouted and stared at him with raised eyebrows. Under his gaze, the wretched man became weak and muttered, Okay, I understand." The big man with the beard looked at Mo Chenga and said gently, "Fellow Taoist, Junior Marshal brother, and I have no choice but to do this shady business. I can guarantee we won't hurt you." Mo Chenga stared at the big man with the beard and sneered. "What's the difference between wanting my Chenkuan bag and wanting my life? For cultivators, don't tell me you don't know the importance of a Chenkuan bag?" The big man with the beard was speechless. After a while he finally said, "Then you just need to hand over some spirit stones." Mo Chenga stared at him and couldn't help but narrow her eyes. "I only want spirit stones. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you after you let me go?" The big man with the beard shook his head. We have our own ways. Big brother, why are you talking to her so much? In any case, we've already done it." The wretched man couldn't wait to interrupt their conversation. He stared at Mo Chenga with an ominous glint in his eyes. "My big brother is easy to talk to, but I'm not. If you don't hand over the spirit stones, I'll give you a bit of suffering." As he spoke, he pulled the knot in his hand. Mo Chenga wrinkled her brows. She felt pain in the places covered by the golden net. She was a bit surprised. Marshal Uncle Xinjiang said most cultivators in Yunzhong had magic weapons that could control spiritual aura. She didn't expect that these two foundation-building cultivators would also have magic weapons that could control spiritual aura. "Junior Marshal brother," the big man with the beard shouted again. "Big brother?" The wretched man said unhappily, "Since we've already decided to do this, why should we be afraid of the slightest thing? What's the point of doing this?" The big man with the beard's eyes dimmed. He lowered his head and said nothing. Mo Chenga's gaze shifted to the two of them and she asked, "Why did you two set up an ambush here? Isn't this the way to Ling Clan? Presumably there should be a lot of people here. Aren't you afraid of being bumped into by others?" This was exactly what puzzled her. She'd been trapped here for so long but no one had come. Ling Clan? Ah. Upon hearing her question, the wretched man laughed triumphantly and said, "There are so many idiots in this world. Who said this road leads to Ling Clan?" Mo Chenga wrinkled her brows and said slowly, "That map is fake? You're still too stupid." The wretched man smiled until his eyes narrowed. "This idea isn't bad, right? A fat sheep that just arrived in Sky Snow City, a lone cultivator, as long as we tamper with the map a bit, will naturally come here." Mo Chenga's expression darkened. "You, quickly hand over your Chenkuan bag." The wretched man lost his patience and shouted, "If you don't hand it over, I won't be polite." "Be polite? I'd like to see how you're going to be rude." Under their gazes, Mo Chenga waved her sleeves. The spiritual aura in her body surged, and the momentum of a core formation cultivator instantly spread. The golden net covering her body fluttered without any wind. The big man with the beard was shocked and shouted, "You're in the core formation realm." The wretched man was stunned for a moment, then he hastily made a hand seal, trying to retract the golden net. Mo Chenga snorted coldly and gently raised her hand. The wretched man immediately felt a strong pressure coming from the other side. His face instantly turned red and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Senior," the big man with the beard shouted. He didn't dare to step forward and took out his Chenkuan bag. "Senior, please let go of my junior marshal brother. I'm willing to offer all my belongings to you." Mo Chenga cast a glance at the big man. He was actually smart. He knew he couldn't resist and immediately begged for mercy. Unfortunately, it was too late. Mo Chenga only glanced at him once, then withdrew her gaze. Under the surging spiritual aura, her sleeves fluttered even though there was no wind. She opened and closed her right palm. The wretched man let out an "ah," and could only watch helplessly as the golden net in his hand was taken by her. The wretched man was so shocked that he couldn't react. Mo Chenga was angry at his frivolous words just now, so she didn't show any mercy. She gathered spiritual aura in her hand and struck him. Ah! With a blood-curdling scream, the wretched man was sent flying and crashed into a rock. His head tilted to one side and his whole body softly fell to the ground. He was no longer breathing. "Junior Marshal brother." The big man with the beard widened his eyes and threw himself at him. He was stunned when he realized he was no longer breathing. After a while he suddenly turned to look at Mo Chenga. "You, what? Do you want revenge?" Emo Chinga raised her eyebrows and asked when she saw the fierce glint in the man's eyes. The man was stunned at first, but soon after, his expression turned sorrowful and his whole body softened. A core formation cultivator? He was merely in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. How could he take revenge? Emo Chinga couldn't help but feel strange when she saw the man's appearance. Based on their conversation just now, these two people didn't have the same temperament. Why did they block the road and rob people together? This whole thing was strange. What was going on? Chapter 356. The bearded man hugged his companion and sobbed. Emo Chinga watched as the tall and strong man cried miserably, and the strange feeling in her heart grew stronger. What was the relationship between these two people? Their personalities were obviously very different, but they seemed to be very close to each other, and they even had some kind of commandment. After crying for a while, the man wiped his face dejectedly when he saw Emo Chinga. "Senior, if you want to kill us, just kill us. We offended you first, so we can only blame ourselves for not following the commandment and not knowing how to recognize people." Emo Chinga frowned and stared at the man without saying anything. After a while, seeing that she didn't want to attack, the man raised his head and looked at her with puzzled eyes. "Senior, are you a Buddhist cultivator?" Emo Chinga suddenly asked. There was a flash of hesitation in the big man's eyes. He paused for a moment and finally nodded. "Yes, Junior is a Buddhist cultivator, sure enough." In Yunzhong, Buddhist cultivators were different from Dao cultivators. They had stricter commandments. However, she felt it was quite strange. That wretched man was fine, but this man obviously cared about commandments from time to time, so why did he rob passers-by with her? "Since you're a Buddhist cultivator, why did you pretend to be a Dao cultivator and rob people here? Am I the first person you robbed?" Upon hearing this question, the man fell silent. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, "Senior, this is my secret and I'll never tell anyone. You were indeed the first person we robbed. We hired a child to sell maps at the teleportation circle. If we took a fancy to someone, we would ask him to sell the tampered map to that person. Who knew that we would make a mistake at the first time? We really brought this upon ourselves." At this point, he sighed dejectedly. "Senior, if you want to kill me, just kill me. I have nothing to say." However, after he closed his eyes and waited for a long time, Emo Chinga only asked, "Where does the Ling house go?" The man opened his eyes and stared blankly at Emo Chinga. "You won't kill me?" Emo Chinga looked at him calmly and repeated, "Where does the Ling house go?" "Over there." He pointed at the road on the right in a daze. Emo Chinga nodded, then turned around and walked away. "Senior?" the man shouted behind her. Emo Chinga stopped and her gaze turned cold. "What? Do you want me to kill you?" The burly man hurriedly shook his head and said, "That inescapable net." Emo Chinga couldn't help but laugh. "Could it be that you still want to go back?" The burly man was silent. He knew that this was just wishful thinking. They blocked the road and robbed a core formation senior. It was already good enough that the senior didn't kill them. How could they possibly return the magic treasure to him? It was just that, if he lost his life, then it would have been fine. He wouldn't have thought about anything else. But now, his junior brother was dead and the heaven and earth net was lost, but he was left with his life. How could he face his master? No, he couldn't continue to be dispirited like this. At the very least, he had to return to Mount Baifu. As he watched Emo Chinga's departing figure, the burly man's gaze gradually became fervent. Once she was back on the right path, she took out the golden net from her sleeve and examined it carefully. This net was woven from an unknown golden thread. It was exquisite and light as if it was weightless. The spiritual energy attached to it was very strange. It was very different from the spiritual energy of cultivators. Could it be Buddhist energy? After thinking for a while, she shook her head, threw the golden net into her Chenkuan bag and continued forward. In fact, if she wanted to know the inside story, she could have used the soul-searching technique on that burly man. However, this wasn't a big deal, so it wasn't worth it. For the current her, this was a trivial matter. She hated that wretched man, so she just killed him. If she didn't want to kill the bearded burly man, then she wouldn't kill him. There was no need to think about the consequences. With strength, many problems wouldn't be a problem. After taking the path on the right, a courtyard made of white stones soon appeared in front of him. At the entrance of the courtyard, there were several low-level aura refining cultivators guarding the door. If any cultivators came to visit, they would chat with them. As Emo Chinga approached, someone immediately came to greet her. "Senior, are you here to rent an immortal's cave?" Emo Chinga nodded. "Yes." That person immediately said, "Please come with me." Mo Chenga followed the aura refining cultivator into the courtyard and into a room. This room looked like an ordinary study, similar to Xianqing School's steward's hall. There was a wide table on one side, and a foundation building cultivator was lying motionlessly on the table, holding a wine bottle in his hand. The whole room reeked of alcohol. When the aura refining cultivator who led Mo Chenga into the room saw her eyebrows twitching unconsciously, he hastily opened the window, then stepped forward to push the seemingly drunk foundation building cultivator. Second uncle, second uncle. After a while the cultivator finally moved. Without raising his head, he said with dissatisfaction, "What do you want?" The aura refining cultivator smiled apologetically. "Second uncle, there's a foundation building senior here to rent an immortal's cave." After a while the cultivator finally reacted. He rubbed his eyes, stretched his body and shifted his gaze to Mo Chenga. Seeing that Mo Chenga was a young woman, the cultivator slightly curbed his arrogance and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you here to rent an immortal's cave?" Mo Chenga answered calmly. This cultivator from Ling clan looked very young. He looked to be about 30 years old. He had a short beard and a ruddy complexion. Unfortunately he was too slovenly and looked very sloppy. The cultivator glanced at her, then pointed at the chair across from him. "Please sit." Mo Chenga looked at the dark blue Taoist robe at the cuffs of his sleeves, then at the chair. After a moment of hesitation, she cautiously sat down. Upon seeing her expression, the cultivator probably felt embarrassed. His face turned slightly red and he rolled up his sleeves. "May I know what kind of immortal's cave fellow Taoist wants to rent?" Mo Chenga said, "I'm not familiar with Sky Snow City, so I don't know what's different about the immortal's cave your manor rents. Fellow Taoist, please tell me." "Oh, I see." The cultivator nodded, then took a scroll from the table. He then spread it open with his hand. This scroll was extremely large and practically covered the entire table. The shape of a mountain was drawn on it. Obviously it was a map of Whitestone Mountain. Between the mountain rocks, there were many circles drawn. These circles varied in size and color. Some were white, some were blue, some were green and some were purple. Some were ticked and some weren't. The cultivator from Ling clan said, "Our Ling clan's immortal's cave is divided into 4 kinds according to the spiritual aura. The purple one has the richest spiritual aura, the green one is barely passable, the blue one is slightly worse, and the white one only has a little bit of spiritual aura. The size of the circles indicates the size of the immortal's cave. A small immortal's cave only has 3 stone rooms, while a medium-sized immortal's cave has everything you need. A cultivation room, a spiritual beast room, a pill concocting room, a medicinal garden. Whatever you want, you can have it. A large immortal's cave not only has all these, but it also has a cultivation room for disciples and juniors. As for the price, the bigger the immortal's cave, the more expensive it is." At this point, the cultivator raised his head and glanced at Mo Chenga. "Is fellow Taoist alone?" "Yes." "If fellow Taoist is alone, it doesn't need to be too big. You can choose a small or medium-sized one." Mo Chenga nodded, expressing her agreement. "Then what's the price according to the spiritual aura?" The cultivator didn't answer her question. Instead he asked, "Fellow Taoist, do you want to stay here permanently or temporarily?" Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe for a few months, maybe for a year or 2. Then it's neither too long nor too short." The cultivator muttered to himself, then said, "Fellow Taoist, we rent caves on a daily basis and an annual basis. The daily rent is 3 times higher than the annual rent. If you want to stay for more than 4 months, we'll rent it annually. Otherwise we'll rent it daily." Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then said, "Then we'll rent it annually." The cultivator nodded. According to the medium-sized immortal's cave, the annual rent is 400 spirit stones for a purple immortal's cave, 280 spirit stones for a green immortal's cave, 150 spirit stones for a blue immortal's cave, and only 30 spirit stones for a white immortal's cave. He quickly sized up Mo Chenga, then said, "Fellow Taoist, you're a foundation building cultivator and your cultivation level is quite high. Not to mention the purple immortal's cave, I think you should be able to afford the green and blue immortal's caves." Mo Chenga said, 280 spirit stones a year, 150 spirit stones a year. This price isn't low, right? Even if it was a white immortal's cave, which cost 30 spirit stones a year, ordinary aura refining cultivators couldn't afford it. Back when she was in Yunwu sect, she only had to pay 5 spirit stones a month. The Ling clan cultivator laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't look down on Ling clan's immortal's cave. Even if it's a white immortal's cave, it's still much better than other places in Sky Snow City. Coupled with the function of white spirit stones, it's very difficult to find an immortal's cave like this in other cities. What he said wasn't false. For example, on North Pole Island, the inn's small courtyard cost 1 spirit stone a day, which was equivalent to more than 300 spirit stones a year. Moreover, the spiritual aura there was only average. On her way here, Chenga only felt that although the spirit veins here were also average, when paired with white spirit stones, they could be considered above average. All right, Chenga said, I want a blue immortal's cave. A small one is fine. How many spirit stones? When the Ling clan cultivator heard this, he glanced at her with slight astonishment, but he didn't say anything. He just answered, 80 spirit stones a year. This price was also affordable for ordinary foundation building cultivators. Chenga nodded, took out a small bag of spirit stones from her Chenkuan bag, handed it over and poured it on the table. This is a year's rent. The Ling clan cultivator roughly glanced at it, then flicked his sleeve. In an instant only a few spirit stones remained on the table. Chenga looked down and was a bit surprised. She didn't count them in detail, she just roughly counted them. This cultivator only glanced at them, but he actually counted them? After receiving the spirit stones, the Ling clan cultivator said, All right, fellow Taoist, you can see for yourself where you want to live. If there's no tick, it means there's currently no one living there. You can choose whichever you like. Chenga put away the few remaining spirit stones on the table, then lowered her head to look at the scroll. In the end, she chose a small blue circle in the corner. I'll stay here. The Ling clan cultivator nodded. He gathered spiritual aura on his fingertips and pointed at the small blue circle. The circle shone with a blue light and a tick appeared. Then he took out a jade tablet from his Chenkuan bag, cast a spell on it and handed it over. This is the Immortal's Cave tablet. Fellow Taoist, keep it well. Chenga took it. Thank you. The Ling clan cultivator waved his hand and shouted, Xiaoshan, come here. The low-level cultivator who led Chenga into the Immortal's Cave hurriedly ran inside. Second uncle. The cultivator pointed at Chenga. Take her to Immortal's Cave number 23. Yes. The low-level cultivator turned to Chenga. Senior, please. When Chenga walked out of the room, she couldn't help but shake her head when she saw the Ling clan cultivator holding the wine bottle again. There were actually cultivators in this world who loved wine so much. After she walked far away, the Ling clan cultivator held the wine bottle, rubbed his nose and said to himself, he has so many treasures, but he only lives in a blue immortal's cave, and it's even a small one. He's really stingy. Chapter 357. Chenga didn't hear what the Ling family cultivator said. If she knew, she would definitely be shocked by the sharpness of this person's gaze and be very vigilant. Although she had a lot of magic weapons, they were all properly stored in her Chenkuan bag. She only wore a pair of cloud-treading boots. The cloud-treading boots weren't magic weapons that exposed spiritual aura, so very few people noticed them at first glance. However, this Ling family cultivator said, a lot of treasures, but she didn't know how he saw it. Not to mention this Ling family cultivator, Chenga smoothly arrived at mysterious cave number 23 under the guidance of the aura refining cultivator, Xiaoshan. After verifying that there were no mistakes, the aura refining cultivator excused himself and left. Chenga entered the blue aura immortal's cave and carefully examined it. There was a formation laid inside the cave. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary forbidding formation, but in fact, there was a secret spying restriction hidden inside. Ling family was a great cultivation clan belonging to Juyen sect. In Sky Snow City their word was law. It wasn't strange for this kind of cultivation clan with absolute power to play some tricks. In any case, the people renting their immortals' caves were individual cultivators, so they generally wouldn't discover this restriction. Even if they did, they could only swallow their anger and couldn't argue with them. Because of that, Chenga only used some tricks to erase this prying restriction. Then, she laid her own formation to replace Ling family's formation. She entered the virtual sky world and released Xiaohua and Xiaofan to let them cultivate on their own. Just as she was about to take out the magic weapons and continue refining them, Xiaohua, who had just released the spiritual beast bag, rushed in and suddenly bit Chenga's sleeve, pulling her outside. What's wrong? Chenga was puzzled when she sensed Xiaohua's anxiety. Xiaohua naturally wouldn't answer. It just bit her sleeve and ran outside. Chenga followed it out of the cultivation room and ran towards the spiritual beast room. Xiaohua slammed the door with its paw and rushed in first. Chenga was shocked as soon as she entered. She saw Feifei lying on the ground, motionless. Its originally golden fur had dimmed a lot. How could this be? She rushed forward and picked Feifei up. She discovered that its spiritual aura was very weak and its body was ice cold. Although Feifei's cultivation level wasn't high, it was very smart. Ever since it established a spiritual beast contract with her, it was like a fish in water in the virtual sky world. Aside from occasionally pestering her to play with it, it never needed her to take care of it. When it was thirsty or hungry, it would find something to eat on its own. She didn't need to care much about its cultivation, she just needed to give it medicinal pills from time to time. But what was going on? Xiaohua whimpered and circled around Mo Chenga twice, looking very downcast. Mo Chenga didn't have time to pay attention to it. She carried Feifei back to her cultivation room and carefully examined the spiritual aura inside its body. The special characteristic of the Feifei race was that they didn't have great power, but they had a unique affinity. It was the same for Feifei. The spiritual energy in its body was quite gentle and not invasive at all. As soon as one approached it, it gave people a feeling of holiness. After a while, Mo Chenga finally withdrew her spiritual aura from Feifei's body and a frown appeared on her face. She had checked Feifei's meridians and dantian and didn't find anything abnormal, but it was a fact that the spiritual aura was very weak. What exactly went wrong? Did it eat something? Or did something go wrong with its cultivation? Regardless of which it was, as long as there was no abnormality in its spiritual aura, she was helpless. Generally speaking, when a cultivator or spiritual beast encountered a problem in their cultivation, it would directly reflect on their spiritual aura. At that time, as long as the chaotic spiritual aura was straightened out, their injuries would naturally heal. But Feifei's current situation wasn't like that, which completely baffled Mo Chenga. She was anxious for a long time, but she could only think of one method. Since its spiritual aura was weak, she could just replenish it. However, this method was somewhat risky. If she replenished too much spiritual aura, it wouldn't be able to bear it for a while, and its meridians and dantian would also be damaged. After thinking for a while, Mo Chenga clenched her teeth and made up her mind. If she let Feifei go on like this, its spiritual aura would become weaker and weaker, and in the end, it wouldn't be able to escape its fate of death. She might as well risk it. With that thought in mind, she took out a jade bottle from her Chengkuan bag, poured out a pill and fed it to Feifei. Feifei was still lying motionlessly on the ground, but soon, its body began to slowly warm up. Seeing that it was effective, Mo Chenga was delighted and continued to stare at it. After a while, the pill's effect slowly weakened, so she fed it another pill. Then she kept repeating the process. When the spiritual aura dissipated, she fed Feifei medicine. After a while, when the spiritual aura dissipated again, she continued to feed it medicine. Time passed day by day. Feifei never woke up, but it also didn't die. Mo Chenga called Xiaofan over, and together with Xiaofan, they took turns feeding Feifei medicine. Because she left most of the medicine to Qinshi before she left, she opened the furnace again to concoct medicinal pills. A month later, the spiritual aura in Feifei's body finally increased. It wasn't as thin as before and its dissipation speed wasn't as fast. Mo Chenga once again used spiritual aura to enter its meridians, going deep into its dantian along the meridians, and finally found the source of the spiritual aura dissipation. As it turned out, there was a weak mass of spiritual aura inside Feifei's dantian. If she didn't look carefully, she wouldn't be able to find it at all. This mass of spiritual aura seemed to be wrapped in something. She carefully probed the spiritual aura, only to find that it was actually a small thing as weak as a speck of dust. It was this thing that was slowly absorbing its spiritual aura. Now, this speck of dust seemed to have eaten its fill and was a lot bigger than before, which was why Mo Chenga discovered it. Although she found the source, it was an unknown object, so Mo Chenga didn't dare to deal with it casually. She continued to feed Feifei medicinal pills while observing the speck of dust. As more and more medicinal pills were fed, the speck of dust finally stopped absorbing spiritual aura, and Feifei's body slowly warmed up. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Feifei didn't die, she could slowly investigate the cause. But Feifei still didn't wake up. The speck of dust absorbed its fill of spiritual aura and slowly grew bigger, as if it was undergoing some kind of change. Several months later, the speck of dust suddenly exploded, emitting a strong spiritual aura. Mo Chenga was shocked. She was afraid it would injure Feifei's dantian, but miraculously, Feifei's spiritual aura was extremely close to the speck of dust. It even separated a part of its spiritual aura to wrap around the speck of dust, seemingly protecting it. Upon seeing this, a thought occurred to Mo Tiange. Could it be that this thing originally belonged to Feifei? This was strange. Feifei was something produced in its body, so why was it crazily absorbing its spiritual aura, causing it to almost lose its life? If no one looked after it and didn't feed it medicinal pills to replenish its spiritual aura, wouldn't Feifei have been tormented to death by this thing? Mo Tiange couldn't answer this question now, so she could only wait for Feifei to wake up. Surrounded by rich spiritual aura, the golden light on Feifei's body became brighter and brighter. Gradually, its whole body was enveloped by a dazzling golden light. Then, countless spiritual aura rushed into its body. Mo Tiange was extremely shocked as she watched the scene in front of her. She knew what was happening. This situation was very similar to when Xiaohua advanced to the 5th rank. Feifei was about to advance to the next realm. What happened next proved her conjecture. Feifei didn't stop absorbing spiritual aura. The golden light submerged the whole cultivation room. Within the golden light, Feifei's spiritual aura fluctuations became stronger and stronger. It was no longer as weak as before, but it began to undulate, breathe and circulate. Now that she was sure it was about to advance, Missouri Tiange felt relieved. She left the cultivation room to Feifei while she looked for another room to meditate and refine her magic weapon. As for Xiaohua, it automatically stood guard outside the door to protect Feifei. Seeing this, Mo Tiange smiled knowingly. In this virtual sky world, Xiaohua and Feifei had no other playmates. The two spiritual beasts had accompanied each other for dozens of years and had a very good relationship with each other. When Xiaohua advanced, Feifei was anxious. Now that Feifei was about to advance, Xiaohua was the same. Spiritual beasts and spiritual beasts were spiritual beings of heaven and earth, so they also had human feelings. In addition, she was also looking forward to Feifei's appearance after it advanced. She remembered that when she was in Linhai, the people of Bishuan court told her that Feifei was a kind of unique spiritual beast. They didn't have powerful spells, but they could coexist peacefully with other demonic beasts. They were also very sensitive to spiritual aura, but their cultivation was extremely slow. Generally, an adult Feifei was only in the 2nd or 3rd rank. Mo Tiange already felt it was very good that Feifei could cultivate to the 4th rank so quickly in this virtual sky world. If it advanced again, it would be in the 5th rank. A 5th rank spiritual beast was equivalent to a core formation cultivator. Most likely, the cultivators in Linhai had never seen a 5th rank Feifei, right? Mo Tiange didn't know whether it had any unique spells or not. Among her 3 spiritual beasts, Xiaofan and Xiaohua were already in the 5th rank. If Feifei also advanced to the 5th rank, other core formation cultivators would be envious. It was already difficult for them to have one 5th rank spiritual beast, so where would they find 3? If it wasn't for the virtual sky world, Mo Tiange wouldn't have 3 5th rank spiritual beasts. Raising spiritual beasts required a lot of medicinal pills. Most cultivators couldn't even guarantee their own medicinal pills, so how could they casually give them to spiritual beasts? In the following time, Mo Tiange sacrificed and refined her magic weapons while waiting for Feifei to advance. Because of the special circumstances of Feifei's advancement, she didn't dare to leave rashly. She could only put other matters aside and wait until Feifei confirmed its advancement. Several months later, the cultivation room Feifei was in finally stopped absorbing spiritual aura and burst with dazzling golden light. This golden light spread and practically dyed the entire virtual sky world gold. Spiritual lights fluttered in the sky. Mo Tiange stretched out her hand and discovered that specks of spiritual light were scattered all over the virtual sky world. She was extremely astonished. The momentum of Feifei's advancement was actually much stronger than Xiaohua's. It looked a bit like a cultivator's core formation. Could this also be a characteristic of its race? The spiritual lights lasted for about half a day before they finally dissipated slowly. The spiritual aura also gradually calmed down. Mo Tiange stood outside the cultivation room. Just as she was about to push the door open, she heard a squeak, and the door was pushed open. Then a mass of golden light threw itself into her arms and a delicate voice rang in her ears. "Master." Mo Tiange held Feifei, whose body was still petite but whose momentum was completely different. She was extremely astonished. "Feifei, you can talk?" Feifei rubbed itself against her chest and yawned. It then said with satisfaction, "I can finally talk. I've been holding it in for so long." Mo Tiange was petrified. She knew Feifei wasn't an ordinary spiritual beast, but why did its voice, which was as delicate as a child's, have this kind of old-fashioned tone? Wasn't Feifei a very cute and playful little spiritual beast? Chapter 358. Emo Chenga was sitting on a praying mat in the cultivation room. There were 2 cups of tea on the small tea table in front of her, emitting smoke. In front of her, Fei Fei was rolling around on the cattail hassock while combing his shiny golden fur. When it finished combing its golden fur, it sat on the praying mat in a very elegant posture. Then it picked up the tea with its claws, narrowed its eyes and took a sip with satisfaction. Emo Chenga was already shocked, so she was very calm when she looked at Fei Fei. Xiaofan was a sea dragon, so it had wisdom that surpassed spiritual beasts of the same rank. Emo Chenga already knew this, but she didn't expect Fei Fei would also have such wisdom when it advanced. It didn't look like a spiritual beast at all. Even if it was a human, it rarely had such rich expressions. In that case, maybe it really was a descendant of the distant past divine beast, Fei Fei. After drinking the tea, Fei Fei raised its head and stared at Emo Chenga with its round eyes for a long time before it said, "Without you, I wouldn't have been able to advance to the 5th rank so quickly. And I'll recognize you as my master." Recognize? In other words, it actually didn't quite agree with the concept of master? Emo Chenga was speechless for a while before she remembered to ask, "Don't we have a spiritual beast contract?" Fei Fei curled its lips, scratched the golden fur on its forehead and said, "That's one thing, but if I don't want to recognize you, it's not impossible." It raised its head to look at Emo Chenga and continued, "The most important thing is that our Fei Fei is very grateful. Without you, I probably wouldn't have advanced to the 5th rank until the end of my life, so I'll recognize you as my master." Ever since Fei Fei learned how to talk, Emo Chenga had been rendered speechless many times. This Fei Fei definitely wasn't that playful and spoiled little spiritual beast from before. In the end, she had no idea what it was. "Master, what's with your expression?" Fei Fei raised its head and asked her in a delicate voice. Emo Chenga was silent. She picked up the teacup on the tea table and took a big gulp, but it was so hot that she spat it out, splashing the tea on the tea table and Fei Fei's beautiful golden fur. Fei Fei rolled around and jumped non-stop. You. My fur, you made my fur wet." Emo Chenga wiped the corner of her mouth and rubbed her brows. She cast a spell, causing the water stains on Fei Fei's body to disappear without a trace. Seeing that her golden fur had regained its bright luster, Fei Fei squatted back in satisfaction and continued to straighten them out one by one. Emo Chenga stared at him for a long time. In the end, she felt powerless. "Are you the original Fei Fei?" "Of course." Fei Fei did not even raise her head. She licked her golden fur and said, "Well, actually, you can say that it's half of me." Yeah. Fei Fei played with its golden fur and said, "Didn't you notice that the phenomenon of my leveling up is a little abnormal?" Emo Chenga said, "There's something inside your body that's absorbing all the spiritual aura in your body? I'm very confused. If we didn't come in at that time and Xiaohua didn't notice anything wrong with you, wouldn't you have died here?" "More or less." At the mention of this topic, Fei Fei's expression was indifferent. "If you didn't come back in time, I would have failed my advancement and died." "Why?" Emo Chenga blurted out. "Could it be that when your Fei Fei advanced to the 5th rank, there were elders watching over you?" "Elders?" Fei Fei wagged her tail. Her gaze was helpless, and her delicate voice carried a hint of melancholy. "How could our Fei Fei have any elders watching over us? It's already good enough that we didn't die out." Emo Chenga wrinkled her brows. "What does that mean? The Fei Fei race is going to be extinct soon?" Upon seeing her doubt, Fei Fei coughed, sat up straight and said, "Since I recognized you as my master, you have the right to know these things. Before I tell you these things, I have to first let you know what kind of race we Fei Fei are." After a long silence, Fei Fei said, "The cultivators in Linhai all think we're just a race that's close to the Fei Fei from the distant past era, but in fact, we're the descendants of the Fei Fei." Upon seeing Emo Chenga's doubtful gaze, Fei Fei rushed to say, "Are you wondering why I know these things?" Emo Chenga nodded. "Before you advanced to the 5th rank, your intelligence wasn't high. When I got you, you were just a cub. That being the case, where did you hear these things from?" Fei Fei said, "This is exactly what I want to tell you. What kind of race we Fei Fei are." It paused for a moment then said, "Since the distant past era, we've lived in the human world and we're called spirits. Because we were born with powerful strength, we're also called divine beasts. The so-called divine beasts are led by the 4 symbols, the Qilin. The azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise guard the 4 directions, and the Qilin guards the central palace. The azure dragon is wood, the white tiger is gold, the vermilion bird is fire, the black tortoise is water, and the Qilin is earth. Under the 4 symbols and 5 spirits, there are us, the spirit race who are born with divine breath. Although we're not as powerful as the 5 spirits, every divine beast race has its own characteristics. The characteristics of us Fei are our innate affinity and inheritance of divine power. Inheritance. Emo Chenga was stunned. A thought flashed in her mind. Could it be that you can even inherit memories? Correct. Fei waved its paw and praised, "You're worthy of being my master." It paused for a moment then continued to say, "We Fei don't have powerful spells, but we can make friends with all spiritual beasts, even ferocious beasts are no exception. In addition, every Fei born will be born with the common memory of their race sealed." Emo Chenga thought for a moment. "So, you've always had the memory of your race in your body, but your cultivation level was too low so you couldn't inherit it?" "Correct." Fei stretched out its paw and looked at it carefully. "Every Fei is like this. When they advance to the 5th rank, the memory in their body will fuse with them. However, ever since the world was divided into 2 realms, we Fei who stayed in the human world couldn't advance to the 5th rank without the guidance of our elders." 2 realms? Emo Chenga suddenly realized this topic seemed to be related to the changes in the human world since the distant past era. "Since you're divine beasts, why didn't you go to the spiritual realm?" "Of course it's because something went wrong." Fei put its paw on the tea table and said, "When the world was divided into 2 realms, most of our ancestors went to the spiritual realm, but some weak ones were left in the human world. Don't ask me why, I can't possibly know everything. Inheritance of memories isn't omnipotent. Master, you've also seen the process of my realm advancement. Without the guidance of a powerful elder, it's impossible for me to advance by myself. This is also the reason why the strength of our Fei is getting lower and lower. Even when we grow up and die, we're only in the 2nd or 3rd rank." Emo Chenga was deeply touched by this. In that situation, if she returned to the virtual sky world a bit later, Fei would have had all its spiritual aura absorbed by the dust in its body and died. She thought for a while then asked, "What's going on with that thing in your body?" "When Xiahua advanced, it was very similar to human cultivators in the core formation realm, but you're completely different. Is this the difference between the divine beasts of the distant past era and the spiritual beasts of today?" "That's not it," Fei said. "The thing in my body is actually the inner core we were born with. We spiritual beasts are different from you cultivators. Even if we're in the 1st rank, we still have a chance to form an inner core. It's just that the chance is very small. But our Fei's inner core is innate." Oh. Emo Chenga understood. "So, when you advance to the 5th rank, as long as your inner core absorbs enough spiritual aura, you can advance successfully?" "Yes. It's just that our cultivation levels aren't high enough. Our inner cores are very weak and can't affect our bodies at all. Only when our cultivation levels are high enough will our inner cores be stimulated and start to absorb spiritual aura. As long as we absorb enough spiritual aura, we can advance smoothly." "I see." Emo Chenga nodded to show she understood. Fei and the others were the descendants of the divine beasts left in the human realm when the demonic beasts were separated. Due to the characteristics of their race, without elders to look after them, they could only become weaker and weaker until they were reduced to ordinary spiritual beasts. Therefore the original Fei was really innocent, but the current Fei had inherited the memory of its race and became a real Fei. "Alright, I'm done." Fei's original proper kneeling posture turned into a crouching position. It blinked and stared at Emo Chenga. In an instant, its voice became flattering. "Master, your clear sky pills are very delicious. Can you let me eat too?" Emo Chenga's hand paused and her eyebrows twitched. "How do you know clear sky pills are delicious? Have you ever secretly eaten them?" She had always given the 3 spiritual beasts medicinal pills that were specially concocted for them. Clear sky pills were medicinal pills for human core formation cultivators, so she had never given them to Fei. Hee. Fei laughed and buried its face under its paws. "Master, when you were concocting medicinal pills, I was curious, so I secretly hid too." Emo Chenga closed the teacup, crossed her arms over her chest and stared at it. "Could it be that you suddenly advanced because you ate clear sky pills?" A 5th rank spiritual beast was equivalent to a human's core formation realm, so logically, clear sky pills could only be eaten by spiritual beasts above the 5th rank. Fei had just advanced, so what was its cultivation level when it ate clear sky pills? "Master, don't be angry." Seeing that Emo Chenga's eyebrows were raised, Fei quietly shrunk its body down, revealing only its head. This is the intuition of a divine beast. When my cultivation level is high enough, I really want to eat to replenish my spiritual aura. I've always let you eat whatever you want in the medicinal garden. Emo Chenga snorted. When I first got you, you wanted to eat flowerless golden fruits, and now you actually want to eat clear sky pills. Right, right? Feifei hastily nodded its head. At that time, I was only in the first rank, so eating flowerless golden fruits wasn't a problem. Now, eating clear sky pills naturally wouldn't be a problem. I'm a divine beast, so I'm naturally different from ordinary spiritual beasts. Hey master, don't pull me. I'm a divine beast now. I'm no longer the Feifei you could rub around as you pleased. Chapter 359. She originally planned to have more contact with the cultivators of Juyin sect after arriving at Sky Snow City, but she didn't expect Feifei's advancement would delay her for more than half a year. When Feifei's matter was finally settled, Emo Chenga exited the virtual sky world. However, to her surprise, several sound-transmitting talismans were floating in front of her cave. She collected all the sound-transmitting talismans. 2 of them were sent by cultivators who lived with her in Ling Clan's cave. They wanted to say hello when they heard there was a foundation-building cultivator living here. The last talisman was a bit strange. The person who sent it was a cultivator from the Ling family that she had met once when she rented the cave abode. The content of this sound-transmitting talisman was very simple. It only said that if she came out of closed-door meditation she should reply. But Emo Chenga felt it was very strange. She had erased the Ling clan's spying restriction in this cave, so how did this person know she was in closed-door meditation? Moreover, it seemed like this sound-transmitting talisman had stopped here for a long time. How did he know when she would reply? Maybe it would be useless at that time. After thinking about it, she still replied to the sound-transmitting talisman according to the message left by the Ling clan cultivator. After that, she prepared to take a stroll in Sky Snow City. Unexpectedly, just as she closed her cave, she saw a flame flashing across the sky. Another sound-transmitting talisman flew towards her. Emo Chenga took the sound-transmitting talisman. The talisman ignited by itself and said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment. I'll be there soon." Emo Chenga was stunned. What does this mean? Is this person waiting for my reply? Moreover, he's looking for me in such a hurry. Is there something urgent? No matter what it is, I'll know after a while. After waiting patiently for a while, Emo Chenga suddenly looked up and saw a blue flight light flashing across the sky with a powerful momentum, rushing towards her. Then, a core formation cultivator wearing an apricot-colored Taoist robe landed in front of her. "I'm Ling Yunhe. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" This person raised his hand and greeted her politely. Emo Chenga was startled. The person in front of her had a clean face and handsome facial features. His long black hair was neatly tied into a Taoist bun with a crown. The apricot-colored Taoist robe he wore was painted with gorgeous cloud patterns, which seemed to highlight its owner's extraordinary identity. He looked imposing and had the demeanor of an immortal. But, for all that, she found traces of familiarity in that face, and the tone of voice, which roused her memory. This person was actually the cultivator of the Ling family who had helped her with the procedures when she rented the cave abode. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that the unkempt and shabby-looking foundation establishment cultivator back then would look like this after changing his clothes. Not only did he look much younger, but his aura was also extraordinary. Most importantly, this person was hiding his cultivation level just like her. He wasn't in the foundation building realm, but the middle stage of the core formation realm. Emo Chenga raised her hand to greet him but didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked bluntly, "Fellow Taoist Ling, what brings you here?" Hearing this question, surprise flashed across this person's eyes. Then he smiled and said, "Aren't you going to ask me how I know your cultivation level and why I'm hiding it?" Emo Chenga stared at him and said faintly, "If fellow Taoist is willing to tell me, of course I want to know." Her meaning was that if he didn't want to tell her, it was useless for her to ask. Upon hearing her answer, this person smiled. "Sure enough, I didn't find the wrong person." He looked behind Emo Chenga and asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, aren't you going to invite me in to sit?" Emo Chenga thought for a moment. This person definitely had something to tell her. Judging from his attitude, it shouldn't be something bad. Thus, she made an inviting gesture. "Fellow Taoist Ling, please come in." When Ling family rented this cave, they had already prepared daily necessities, so Emo Chenga directly invited this person into the small hall used for receiving guests. The 2 of them sat down. This Ling family cultivator looked around the cave then said with a meaningful smile, Fellow Taoists' attainments and formations are really profound. This defensive formation is really extraordinary. Mo Chenga smiled but didn't answer. She had erased the prying restriction on Ling family's formation, so this person must have seen through it at first glance. She was a core formation cultivator, so there was no reason for people to spy on her at will, so she didn't need to feel guilty. There was no tea for guests, and Mo Chenga's attitude wasn't warm either. This person probably realized he wasn't welcome, so he looked a bit embarrassed. He coughed and asked for the second time, "May I know how to address fellow Taoist?" Mo Chenga paused for a moment then answered, "My surname is Qin and my first name is Wei." Since she didn't know this person's intentions, Mo Chenga made up a name. Qinwei, a homonym for Qingwei. "Oh, so it's fellow Taoist Qin." This person nodded without any doubt. "Although it's not our first time meeting, we both concealed our cultivation levels last time, so we can't be considered acquaintances. This time, let me formally introduce myself to fellow Taoist Qin. I'm Ling Yunhe, a cultivator from Sky Snow City's Ling family and an elder of Juyin sect." "Fellow Taoist Ling, it's an honor to meet you." Mo Chenga politely greeted him again. She had already guessed this person's identity. Ling family belonged to Juyin sect. Since this person was a core formation cultivator, he must also be an elder of Juyin sect. Ling Yunhe returned the greeting. His gaze lingered on her for a while, then he said sincerely, "Fellow Taoist Qin, it's a bit presumptuous of me to suddenly pay you a visit, but please rest assured. I absolutely don't have any bad intentions." Under his gaze, Mo Chenga was dumbfounded for a moment before she suddenly understood what he meant. "He thinks I'm a single woman, so he's wary of men?" Mo Chenga didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When she was in the Celestial Pole, she first disguised herself as a man. Later on, she reverted to her female appearance, but she also had the identity of Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple. No one had ever deliberately explained that she was a woman. She didn't expect to encounter this kind of situation when she came to Yunzhong. She found it funny and she suddenly had a good impression of this Ling Yunhe. No matter what this person's intentions were, he still treated her with enough respect even though he didn't know her identity. Thinking up to this point, Mo Chenga smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Ling, please don't blame me. When we first met, fellow Taoist was just a foundation-building cultivator. You're very different from today. Besides, we're not friends, so we suddenly met through voice transmission and you saw through my cultivation level, so I understand." Ling Yunhe smiled and waved his hand. "I can explain this matter to fellow Taoist one by one." He paused for a moment then said, "To be honest, the cultivation technique I practice makes me very sensitive to spiritual aura. If there's any aura of spiritual treasures in the surroundings, it basically can't escape my eyes and ears. When I saw fellow Taoist Qin that day, I sensed a lot of aura of spiritual treasures around your body, so presumably, you have a lot of spiritual treasures. This aura of spiritual treasures doesn't belong to a foundation-building cultivator, so I speculate that fellow Taoist is indeed a core formation cultivator who's just hiding your cultivation level." Oh. Mo Chenga was surprised. She thought to herself, Yunzhong actually has such a strange cultivation technique? With the help of the spirit-concealing pendant, even a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't be able to see through her breath-concealing technique. However, this kind of cultivation technique basically didn't need to see through her breath-concealing technique to infer her true cultivation level. It seems fellow Taoist hasn't come into contact with this kind of cultivation technique. Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "That's not strange. This kind of cultivation technique is unorthodox. You can't find more than a few of them in Yunzhong." "I see." Mo Chenga calmed down. "Then why didn't fellow Taoist expose me that day?" Ling Yunhe shook his head. "Why should I? There are so many cultivators in the world. How many of them don't have some secrets? Our Ling clan is only renting an immortal's cave. As long as they don't have any ulterior motives towards Sky Snow City or our Ling clan, we won't care how many secrets they have." "Is that so?" Mo Chenga smiled and didn't refute him. The real situation naturally wouldn't be as simple as Ling Yunhe made it out to be. Otherwise, why would Ling clan need to set up a spying restriction in the immortal's cave? If there were any secrets among these cultivators that could bring benefits to Ling clan, they definitely wouldn't stand idly by and act like some kind men or women. However, what he said wasn't wrong. If it wasn't harmful to Sky Snow City or Ling clan, they probably wouldn't meddle in other people's business. As for why I hid my cultivation level, Ling Yunhe shook his head with a slightly sad expression on his face. "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Qin. This matter involves my Ling clan and Juyin sect's power, so I was forced to hide my cultivation level." Mo Chenga raised her eyebrows. Ling Yunhe saw that she had a faint smile on her face. She didn't immediately declare that she wouldn't meddle in their sex business and didn't pursue the matter, so he felt a bit nervous. As he recalled his purpose for coming here, he clenched his teeth and said bluntly, "Fellow Taoist must know that my Juyin sect is now facing the sect head selection that happens once every 100 years, and I'm one of the candidates for the position this time." Mo Chenga nodded lightly. As it turned out, not only did this fellow Taoist Ling have an extraordinary background, but his status was also quite important. Although the head Grand Supreme Elder was the most important identity in a big cultivation group, the position of the sect head wasn't something ordinary people could sit on. Generally speaking, the head Grand Supreme Elder was the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in the sect. However, because of this, they usually cultivated wholeheartedly and rarely left their immortals' caves. Therefore, they would only make decisions in the face of important matters. Usually, the sect's affairs were handled by the sect head. As a candidate for the position of sect head, talent, background, connections, and ability were all indispensable. After all, the sect head represented the sect's face, so his talent couldn't be too bad. At the very least, he had to be presentable. This position was usually the result of the various forces in the sect weighing the pros and cons, so people without a background definitely couldn't sit on it. In addition, the sect head usually had to deal with affairs. If he didn't have connections and ability, then the sect head would be equivalent to trash. Since this fellow Taoist Ling could be listed as one of the candidates for the sect head, he seemed to be quite extraordinary. He definitely wasn't the drunkard and sloppy person she met for the first time. Upon seeing Mo Chenga's calm expression, Ling Yunhe couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. He even suspected that he came to the wrong place. If this fellow Taoist Qin wasn't completely clueless about the sect's affairs, then she was too shrewd. The calmer she was, the more passive he became. Should he say it or not? He began to hesitate. While he was still hesitating, Mo Chenga calmly asked, "Does fellow Taoist Ling's purpose for coming here have something to do with this?" Chapter 360. Looking at the calm Mo Chenga in front of him, Ling Yunhe felt both happy and worried. He was happy because this person acted calmly, so he should be the right person to choose. He was worried because she seemed too calm, so it would be difficult to bargain with her. After thinking for a while, he finally said, "I came to ask fellow Taoist Qin for a small favor. As long as you agree, I'll reward you handsomely even if I can't complete it." After saying that, he stared at Mo Chenga without blinking. Mo Chenga just smiled and asked, "Why did fellow Taoist choose me?" With fellow Taoist Ling's identity, whether it's the Ling family or Juyin sect, it should be easy for you to find someone to help you. Why did you choose an unreliable outsider like me? Fellow Taoist Ling didn't even ask about my background. Seeing that she didn't refuse him immediately, Ling Yunhe sighed in relief and said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, I didn't ask my fellow disciples for help because of the sect head selection. Fellow disciples have conflicts of interest, so it's inconvenient to interact with them. As for the Ling family..." A gloomy expression flitted across Ling Yunhe's face. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "I hid my cultivation level because I didn't want to participate in these fights. My eldest cousin represented the Ling family in the sect head selection. Therefore, after I was injured, I deliberately pretended that my cultivation level dropped and asked for a job from the patriarch, making them think I suffered a big blow and couldn't recover. Who knew man proposes, God disposes." Ling Yunhe's words involved the Ling family's and Juyin sect's secrets. Mo Chenga didn't understand. Were the cultivators in Yunzhong too gullible, or was Ling Yunhe really a magnanimous person? He actually dared to say this kind of thing to a complete stranger. Ling Yunhe's expression wavered for a while before he finally heaved a sigh. His gaze once again fell on Mo Chenga. "In short, the sect head selection still falls to me. However, this matter is quite complicated. Not only does it involve the power struggle within the group, but it also involves the conflict of interest between the various Ling clans. Therefore, I have no choice but to look for other helpers." Mo Chenga smiled as if she had no interest in Juyin sect's secrets. She continued to ask, "Fellow Taoist, you still haven't made it clear. Why me? Aren't you afraid I'm someone with ulterior motives?" To this question, Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "Although I have considered this point, I still believe that fellow Taoist Qin is the most suitable candidate." Ling Yunhe said, "First of all, fellow Taoist Qin came to my Ling clan to rent a cave abode. You hid your cultivation and only rented a cave abode with blue gas. This means that you are very low-key and not someone who likes to show off. Secondly, fellow Taoist is cautious and steady. If we cooperate, this is what I value the most. Thirdly, fellow Taoist has many numinous treasures and is quite powerful. He turned his gaze, revealing a meaningful smile. The most important point is fellow Taoist's background. In my opinion, fellow Taoist Qin isn't a person of my Eastern Tang at all, right? Emo Chenga was stunned. She stared at the cloud-soar crane with vigilance in her eyes. Upon seeing Emo Chenga's expression, Ling Yunhe hastily waved his hand. Fellow Taoist Qin, please don't misunderstand. The reason I know about this is because ever since I built my foundation, I've often traveled around. Not to mention Yunzhong continent, I've even been to Yuan province and Shaoyang city. Fellow Taoist Qin's tone of voice is something I've never heard before. Moreover, the way you conduct yourself is also different from the cultivators I've met in the past. That's why I speculated that fellow Taoist Qin isn't a person of my Eastern Tang state or even Yunzhong. Upon hearing his explanation, Emo Chenga slowly relaxed. She thought for a moment, then calmly said, fellow Taoist Ling's guess is correct. I'm indeed not a person of Yunzhong. Upon receiving confirmation, Ling Yunhe smiled. That's right. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a person of Yunzhong continent, so we naturally don't have any conflicts of interest. This time, I'm asking for your help because I'm more reliable than other people. Emo Chenga smiled faintly. She didn't immediately ask what he was asking for help with. Instead, she said, when did fellow Taoist Ling send the sound-transmitting talisman? Aren't you worried that I won't be able to help you when I come out? Ling Yunhe helplessly said, I sent the sound-transmitting talisman a month ago. After fellow Taoist Qin entered the cave, you stayed in seclusion for half a year, so I couldn't contact you. However, fellow Taoist Qin only paid 1 year's rent. In any case, you'll have to come out to renew the lease, right? If I calculate the time, I can still make it. Emo Chenga couldn't help but laugh at his words. She originally didn't plan to stay in Sky Snow City for a long time, but because of Feifei's realm breakthrough, she was delayed for so long. She actually forgot that she only paid 1 year's rent. Ling Yunhe stared at her and earnestly said, fellow Taoist Qin, I've already explained my purpose for coming here in full detail. I wonder if fellow Taoist Qin can help me? Fellow Taoist Ling, Emo Chenga interrupted him and asked with a smile, I already understand your purpose for coming here, but it'd be too rash to agree just like that. May I know what fellow Taoist Ling wants my help with? If it's too dangerous, I don't need to take the risk. And fellow Taoist is right. Ling Yunhe nodded to express his understanding. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a person of Yunzhong continent, so you probably don't know the content of Jiuyin sect's sect head election. Those who can sit on the position of Jiuyin sect's sect head must have the best temperament, cultivation level, ability, and connections. Each of these must pass a strict test. To be honest, I'm quite confident in temperament and ability. It's only my cultivation level that was injured a while ago that greatly affected my strength. Now that the sect head election is right in front of us, our Ling clan must not give up. Therefore, in order to win in the sect head election, we must look for some treasures. Fellow Taoist Ling, Emo Chenga couldn't help but ask, since Ling clan is a great cultivation clan of Jiuyin sect, there must be nascent soul cultivators in the clan, right? If that's the case, wouldn't it be better to ask a nascent soul cultivator to bestow 1 or 2 treasures to us? Why do we need to go through so much trouble? Ling Yunhe smiled bitterly. Fellow Taoist Qin, you might not know this, but among the nascent soul cultivators, which one of them doesn't have a nascent soul elder as their backer? If we can win with just this sect head election will be too easy. In the sect head election we can only use 3 magic weapons, so we have to rely on our own spells most of the time. My cultivation level is injured, so I'm very passive in the sect head election. Oh? I see. What method did fellow Taoist Ling come up with? What kind of spiritual treasure are we going to find? Seeing that she didn't refuse, Ling Yunhe was happy and continued to say, the spiritual treasure I'm looking for is the fretless fruit in Carefree Valley. I wonder if fellow Taoist Qin has heard of it? Fretless fruit? Emo Chenga shook her head. Although she read a lot of ancient books and records, she didn't know much about Yunzhong. Emo Yaoqing's notes didn't mention it, so she didn't know about it. Ling Yunhe explained, speaking of fretless fruit, we have to talk about Carefree Valley first. Carefree Valley is a very famous secret place in Yunzhong. According to legend, this place used to be a paradise in the Middle Ages with abundant spiritual aura and spiritual treasures everywhere. Unfortunately, the world changed and the Carefree Valley became filled with miasma. Thus, it became a dangerous place. However, the spiritual aura from the Middle Ages era still remains here, so there are still many spiritual treasures here. Among them, the most famous is the fretless fruit. This fretless fruit grows on the fretless tree which only grows in Carefree Valley. It's like a living thing disappearing as soon as it enters the ground, so it's very difficult to find. But if you can find the fretless tree and pick the fretless fruit, it'll bring you great benefits. After eating the fretless fruit, you'll have endless spiritual aura for a day. Is that so? Emo Chenga couldn't help but be moved. Within a day he would have an endless supply of spiritual qi. It was no wonder that Ling Yunhe wanted to find the carefree fruit. With it, he would be almost invincible in a battle even if he could only bring 3 enchanted treasures with him. Even her virtual sky world didn't have this kind of treasure. Upon seeing Emo Chenga's expression, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Taoist Qin, if you help me find the fretless fruit, I can guarantee I only want one. I won't be greedy." Emo Chenga's gaze wavered, but she didn't agree immediately. Instead she asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Ling, what kind of help do you have? Don't tell me it's just the 2 of us?" "Of course not," Ling Yunhe said. "I also have a few friends. This time I asked 2 of them to help me and they also invited another 2 people. So, including fellow Taoist Qin, there are 6 people in total." Emo Chenga's gaze flickered but she still said, "Really? Fellow Taoist friends and friends. You're all on the same side, right?" Ling Yunhe keenly understood the meaning behind her words and immediately said, "My 2 friends have indeed been best friends for many years, but the other 2 people aren't friends. They only came to help because of the special terrain of Carefree Valley." 3 against 3. Emo Chenga nodded slightly. This Ling Yunhe was really thoughtful. He had 2 friends to help him so he wouldn't be at a disadvantage on this trip. He also invited the other 3 people to help him to reassure them. What about their cultivation levels? 2 are in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and the other 2 are in the early stage. My 2 friends each have 1, Ling Yunhe answered immediately. Obviously he had thought about this a long time ago. Emo Chenga looked at him and smiled. "After saying so much, fellow Taoist Ling seems to be sure I'll go? If I don't come out, what will you do?" Upon hearing this question, Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment, then he smiled bitterly. "If that's the case, I'll have to find someone else. To tell you the truth, I've been looking everywhere for a month, but unfortunately I haven't found a suitable candidate. Their cultivation level can't be too high or too low, and their identity and personality must be suitable. As an elder of Juyin sect, I have a lot of good friends, but it's inconvenient for me to invite any of them at this time. Carefree Valley isn't simple either. We calculated that at least 6 people are needed to safely pass through the valley entrance. Fortunately, fellow Taoist came out at this time, otherwise I'd really have a headache." At this point Ling Yunhe promised, "Rest assured, fellow Taoist Qin. Although this trip is dangerous, I'm more than 70% sure I'll come back safely. Fellow Taoist Qin, you must have experienced many dangers when you're traveling alone. 70% is enough for me to take a gamble." The process of cultivation was almost a constant gamble. Advancing to the next realm was a gamble, and finding fated chances was even more of a gamble. This was the same for cultivators in both the Celestial Pole and Yunzhong. Emo Chenga also knew what Ling Yunhe said wasn't false. Most cultivators were willing to take a gamble if they could find something like the carefree fruit with more than 70% certainty. However, was it necessary for her to do so? Chapter 361. Facing Ling Yunhe's invitation, Emo Chenga considered it again and again but still didn't give a definite answer. Although Ling Yunhe's words were very good, it was too risky to say yes just like that. Ling Yunhe felt very regretful about this, but he politely asked Emo Chenga to think about it. Emo Chenga agreed. It wasn't that she wouldn't go. After all, Ling Yunhe's identity was clear. If he became the head of Juyin sect, it would be much more convenient for her to make friends with him in Yunzhong. Even if he couldn't become the head, it would be very beneficial for her to know an elder of Juyin sect now that she was alone in Yunzhong. After Ling Yunhe left, Emo Chenga also left the cave and went to the market square of Sky Snow City. Whether she agreed or not, she had to give Ling Yunhe an answer. That being the case, she might as well go to Sky Snow City to inquire about the information he said and see if it was really worth the risk. The market square of Sky Snow City was located in the center of Sky Snow City. The map in her hand was real except for the sign of Ling Clan's Immortals Cave. Emo Chenga smoothly found the location of the market square according to the map. The market square of Sky Snow City also belonged to Ling Clan. As soon as Emo Chenga stepped into the market square, she saw the huge word Ling fluttering in the wind at the entrance. Since most of Sky Snow City was Ling Clan's property, it was normal for the market square to belong to Ling Clan. This was the main source of spirit stone income. Any cultivation clan with some property would be involved in the market square business. The purpose of Mo Chenga's trip was the tea house in Sky Snow City. The so-called tea house was quite common in Yunzhong. Its purpose was to facilitate cultivators to make friends and inquire about information. At first, when Mo Chenga saw the mark of the tea house on the map, she didn't understand it. After asking Ling Yunhe, she learned the purpose of the tea house. Because of this, Ling Yunhe was even more certain that she wasn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so Mo Chenga vaguely admitted that she was a cultivator from another continent. As for whether she was Shaoyang or Yuanzhou, Ling Yunhe couldn't guess that she was from the Celestial Pole. After all, the Celestial Pole and Yunzhong were separated by the South Sea, and they hadn't had much contact for more than 100,000 years. The tea house in Sky Snow City looked like a rather simple shop. However, there was a tall flag with the word "He" on it that was faintly glowing, which made it seem unusual. In Yunzhong, the tea house's flag was very particular. The strength of the spirit qi on it indicated the grade of the tea house. If it was only a faint spiritual aura, it meant the place was mainly used to entertain aura-refining cultivators. If it was a spirit tool, it meant there were foundation-building cultivators around. If it was a magic tool, it meant core formation cultivators could be found in the tea house. Of course, the tea flag could also be a magic weapon, which meant there was a nascent soul cultivator guarding the tea house. However, Mo Chenga also knew this was only in theory. Even if the cultivation level of Yunzhong was higher than that of the Celestial Pole, it shouldn't be so high that they could casually hang their magic treasures outside, right? The tea flag on the tea house in Sky Snow City was clearly a magic treasure. This meant that core formation cultivators could be found in the tea house. This wasn't strange. Sky Snow City was close to Jiuyan sect and was the territory of Jiuyan sect's Ling clan, so there would naturally be many high-level cultivators coming and going in the vicinity. However, Mo Chenga still didn't show her real cultivation level because the matter she wanted to inquire about was related to Jiuyan sect's affairs. As a core formation cultivator, it would be somewhat inconvenient. "Senior, are you alone?" Just as she arrived at the entrance of the tea house, a low-level cultivator immediately lifted the curtain and very considerately led her inside. Once she entered, Mo Chenga raised her head and looked around. She suddenly felt like she was in a completely different world. From the outside it looked like an ordinary shop, but inside there was a hall the size of a public square. In the hall, there were several long tables and chairs separated by flowers and trees. The hall looked well-proportioned, spacious and bright. There were many cultivators with similar cultivation levels gathered in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing. Mo Chenga glanced around and found that most of the people here were foundation-building cultivators. There weren't many aura-refining cultivators, and core formation cultivators were naturally the least. She estimated there were only about 10 people and they were all in the wing rooms. "Senior, are you alone?" the shop assistant asked again. Mo Chenga regained her train of thought and nodded at him. "Yes." The shop assistant showed a professional smile and continued to ask, "Then, are you looking for companions or making friends?" "Looking for companions?" Mo Chenga thought about it. She was probably looking for cultivators in the same realm as her to adventure with. She answered, "I want to communicate with cultivators in the same realm as me." "Oh, I see," the shop assistant said. "Our tea house charges 1 spirit stone. If you're at your own leisure, we won't charge you anything else. If you need to introduce a senior to us or look for someone, you'll have to pay extra." Mo Chenga nodded to show she understood. She took out a spirit stone and gave it to the shop assistant. The shop assistant immediately gave her a new waste tablet and said, "Senior, please help yourself. If you need anything, just call us." Mo Chenga nodded, then casually found an empty seat in the hall and sat down. The shop assistant served her tea, then left. Mo Chenga sat on an empty seat against the wall, slowly sipping her tea while her gaze swept over the other people in the hall from time to time. The cultivators here seemed to be much more enthusiastic than those in the Celestial Pole. She saw with her own eyes 2 cultivators she didn't know chatting with each other very enthusiastically. The soundproofing method of these foundation-building cultivators wasn't a problem for her. She could clearly hear some cultivators talking about cultivation. Some experiences were considered secrets in the Celestial Pole. Only very close friends or fellow disciples would talk to each other, but they didn't hold back at all. She thought to herself that no matter what, Yunzhong was a place where the atmosphere of cultivation was excellent. "Fellow Taoist." Just as she was thinking, a voice came into her ears. Mo Chenga turned around and saw a middle-stage foundation-building cultivator with a burly appearance talking to her. Is fellow Taoist here to look for companions? Mo Chenga shook her head gently. Seeing her outstanding cultivation level, the burly man didn't want to give up and asked again, fellow Taoist, are you not interested in treasure hunting? We're only short of one person. Mo Chenga shook her head again and smiled. I'm just here to rest for a while and communicate with fellow Taoists. After receiving another negative answer, the burly man felt regretful, but he didn't pester her any further. He excused himself and left. Afterward, several people came to talk to her. Two of them were also looking for companions, while the others wanted to exchange goods. Mo Chenga still shook her head and refused. Fellow Taoist, may I sit here? Another voice came into her ears. Mo Chenga turned around. This time, it was a young-looking early-stage foundation-building cultivator who was looking at her shyly. She thought for a moment. Sitting here. Does he mean he wants to chat with me? She was waiting for this, so she nodded and smiled. Of course. The young man was overjoyed to see her polite attitude. Mo Chenga's current cultivation level was in the late stage of the foundation-building realm. The foundation-building realm wasn't the aura-refining realm. There was a huge difference between the early stage and the late stage. A late-stage cultivator was equivalent to several early-stage cultivators. The young man sat down. An attendant who was walking on the side immediately served him tea before he respectfully retreated. My surname is Tan and my name is Dongshin. I'm from Qing province. May I know how to address you? The young man said politely. My surname is Qin and my name is Wei. I come from the outer endless sea. The outer endless sea was what Yunzhong called the other continents that were separated by the sea like Shaoyang and Yuanzhou. She came from the celestial pole, so it was reasonable to say that she was also from the outer endless sea. Upon hearing this, Tan Dongshin's eyes lit up. Since you're from the outer endless sea, you must be very knowledgeable. Mo Chenga smiled and didn't deny it. I've just been to a few places. She raised her head and looked at the young man. He was very young, only in his early 20s. His expression was bashful, as if he was not good at socializing with people. However, he was polite and well-educated. Based on her experience, this youth was only in the early stage of the foundation-building realm. His appearance also didn't look like he'd taken look-preserving pills or the like. His movements were very youthful, so he should have just built his foundation. Maybe he was only in his 20s or 30s. With that thought, she asked, fellow Taoist Tan, you're so young. Did you just build your foundation? Tan Dongshin's eyes widened in surprise. How did fellow Taoist Qi know? Mo Chenga smiled. It's just experience. The longer you live, the more you'll see. Oh. Upon hearing her answer, Tan Dongshin looked a bit disappointed. He'd been observing this female cultivator for a long time. She looked young, had a gentle temperament, and sat there quietly. Although she wasn't very beautiful, she was very attractive. This kind of female cultivator was very rare in Yunzhong. Her high cultivation level was one of the reasons she had such a high cultivation level, but what was rare was that she was very amiable and always had a smile on her face, leaving a good impression on others. He summoned his courage to come forward and talk to her. He always felt that although this girl was already in the late stage of the foundation-building realm, she should be very young. Maybe she was only in her 70s or 80s, so she shouldn't be much older than him. However, Mo Chenga's words just now hinted that he was quite old, which made his guess come to nothing. He was very disappointed. However, no matter how disappointed he was, being able to communicate with a fellow late-stage foundation-building cultivator was something he could only hope for. Therefore, he quickly cheered up and said to Mo Chenga with a smile, fellow Taoist Qin's eyes are really sharp. I've indeed just built my foundation and came out to travel. Mo Chenga nodded with a smile. Her gaze lingered on Tan Dongshin for a while, then she asked, fellow Taoist Tan, you have an extraordinary bearing. Are you a disciple of a big family? This question made Tan Dongshin look slightly proud. He nodded and said, yes, I'm a disciple of the Tan clan in Qingzhou. Tan clan in Qingzhou. Mo Chenga wasn't from Yunzhong, so she knew nothing about it. However, judging from Tan Dongshin's expression, it should be a famous big family, so she took the opportunity to praise him. I see. Fellow Taoist Tan is a disciple of a big family and is also young and promising. You're really a young talent. I wouldn't dare. Upon hearing her praise, a shy smile appeared on Tan Dongshin's face again. I'm nothing in the clan. I only built my foundation when I was in my 30s. My elder brothers built their foundation when they were in their early 20s. I'm far behind them. Huh? Really? Mo Chenga raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, building your foundation in your 30s is quite rare. Even elite disciples of big cultivation groups can only do this, right? Tan Dongchen scratched his head embarrassedly and changed the topic. Let's not talk about me. Fellow Daoist Qin, you're from the outer endless sea. Why did you come to Yunzhong? I've never seen a person from the outer endless sea. I came to travel, Mo Chenga said. I just came from North Pole Island and haven't been in Sky Snow City for long. I heard there's a tea house in Sky Snow City, so I came to take a look and communicate with fellow Taoists in Yunzhong. Maybe it'll be helpful for my cultivation. She looked at the young man and smiled. Fellow Taoist Tan, since you're a disciple of a big family, presumably your vision is also extraordinary. I wonder if you'd like to share your cultivation experience with me? Chapter 362. After talking with Tan Dongchen for a while, Mo Chenga soon figured out what happened. The Azure Province was a large city only a few hundred kilometers away from Sky Snow City. The Tan clan of Qing Province, like the Ling clan of Sky Snow City, was the #1 cultivation clan in the region. More than half of the entire Qing Province belonged to the Tan clan. However, unlike the Ling clan, though the Tan clan was inextricably linked to the Jiyan sect, they did not belong to the Jiyan sect in name. In reality, the Tan clan did not belong to any sect. In their clan, the strongest was a nascent soul cultivator, and there were also several core formation cultivators, as well as countless foundation building and chi refining disciples. Such a great cultivation clan was not inferior to an ordinary mid-sized sect. Among the large sects, they often held a decisive position. However, the Tan clan was not a member of some great sect. They used the clan as their foundation and recruited outer sect disciples. Over the past several thousand years, they had become more and more powerful in the Azure Province, and their might was no different from that of a sect. It could be said that they were actually a sect, just a family clan. And the reason why the Tan clan was able to gain a foothold in Azure Province was also because of their relationship with the Jiyan sect. Tan Dongchen said that because of their close proximity, the Tan clan had in-laws with many clans in the Jiyan sect, including the Ling clan. Mo Chenga had been in Shenxing school for a long time, so she knew that many clans in this kind of big cultivation group relied on marriage to stabilize their relationships. She immediately understood that Tan clan also used this method to form a beneficial alliance with Jiyan sect. That was why they were able to develop such a great clan right next to Jiyan sect. After learning about all this, Mo Chenga really admired the successive clan masters of the Tan clan. Jiyan sect's status in Yunzhong was even stronger than that of Tiandao sect in the Celestial Pole. Tiandao sect was known as the #1 cultivation group in the Celestial Pole, but among the 7 great cultivation groups, Xianqing School and Gujian sect weren't much weaker. But in Yunzhong, Jiyan sect was not only the #1 sect for cultivators, it was also the #1 sect for all cultivators. Ever since the decline of Dawning Pill sect, no sect in Eastern Tang had been strong enough to catch up to Jiyan sect. They could only watch as Jiyan sect grew stronger and stronger. After thousands of years, the current Jiyan sect could be said to be a great crocodile in the clouds. No one dared to block its path. Not only had the Tan clan established a firm foothold by the bedside of the Jiyan sect, they had even developed and become stronger. This kind of ability to wield power and influence was truly impressive. Among the people Mo Chenga knew, even Luo Fengxue, who always talked like a human or a ghost, didn't have this kind of ability. Although they said they were exchanging cultivation experiences, in fact, with the gap in their cultivation levels, it was Mo Chenga who was giving Tan Dongchen pointers. Tan Dongchen knew that he had taken advantage of the situation, so he had nothing else to say. He told him about the situation in Yunzhong, especially about the Jiyan sect. The management style of the Jiyan sect was different from that of the large sects in the Celestial Pole. Although they also enjoyed power and status according to their cultivation levels, the positions of sect head, administrator, and elders had to go through an election. This was especially true for the position of sect leader. Any core formation cultivator in the sect could participate as long as they were nominated by the 2 grand elders. The election process was completely transparent. Even ordinary disciples could clearly understand it. However, Mo Chenga knew this was only on the surface. After all, those nascent soul grand supreme elders had the final say on who was qualified to participate, and in the end, it was still those grand supreme elders who would decide who won. Therefore, the position of sect leader could only be considered partially transparent. The final position of the sect leader was not only a competition between the various candidates, but also a competition between the forces represented by the Grand Supreme Elders. Speaking of this matter, Tan Dongchen mysteriously told her about some gossip. As it turned out, many wonderful things happened in the Jiuyan sect's sect leader election. For example, one of the original candidates, a core formation cultivator from Yin clan, went out to search for treasures for the sect leader election, but in the end he mysteriously disappeared. As for Ling clan's candidate, he encountered a high-level sea beast in the Sea of Returning Ruins and returned with serious injuries. He had no choice but to withdraw from the election and was replaced by another cultivator. When Emo Chinga heard this, her eyes brightened. She asked, "Could it be that there's some secret behind this?" Tan Dongshan looked around then said mysteriously, "Who knows what happened? However, all the accidents happened so coincidentally. There can't be such a coincidence in this world, right?" The two of them looked at each other and smiled tacitly. Emo Chinga asked again, "Let's forget about Yin clan's matter, but the Ling clan's candidate encountered a sea beast in the Sea of Returning Ruins. This can't be fake, right?" "That's hard to say," Tan Dongshan said. "I heard in the clan that the Ling clan has been fighting fiercely in the past few decades. The original sect leader candidate was a direct descendant of the Ling clan, but the current candidate is from a branch family that has always been suppressed by the direct descendant." Tan Dongshan told her about this matter in detail. As it turned out, although the Ling clan was huge and had a large population, the talented people in the branch family had always withered, and the affairs in the clan had always been decided by the direct descendant. However, 100 years ago, a cultivator appeared in the Ling clan. He built his foundation at the age of 20 and formed his gold core at the age of 80. In one fell swoop, he became the most eye-catching junior in the Ling clan. At the same time, several descendants of the Ling clan also produced talented people who formed their gold cores. In the past 100 years, there had been many talents emerging, and it was supposed to be the time for the Ling family to shine. However, for some reason, these rising stars of the Ling family were fighting endlessly for the sake of their own interests, dragging the Ling family into an endless power struggle. At this point, Mo Chenga learned the name of that genius from Tan Dongshan. Sure enough, it was Ling Yunhe. Before the sect leader election, outsiders originally guessed that Ling Yunhe would participate in the election. Unexpectedly, he was injured in an accident and his cultivation level dropped, so the Ling clan sent a direct descendant to participate without a doubt. Who knew that the incident in the Sea of Returning Ruins would happen? This Ling clan cultivator had no choice but to withdraw from the sect leader election. Originally, people thought the Ling clan could only give up this time, but not long after, Ling Yunhe's cultivation level recovered and he was sent to participate again. This matter was full of ups and downs and twists and turns, which really made outsiders enjoy talking about it. Outsiders didn't know what was hidden in this matter, but this didn't prevent them from enthusiastically guessing. Mo Chenga listened to several versions relayed by Tan Dongshan and was so happy that she almost couldn't hold back. Among them, some said that Ling Yunhe was suppressed by the direct descendant and was unwilling to withdraw from the sect leader election, so he plotted against his clan elder brother. Others said that the clan elder brother plotted against Ling Yunhe, but in the end, man proposes, God disposes. The funniest part was that the clan elder brother was very fond of this cousin, but Ling Yunhe was too arrogant and ignored him. Because his love for Ling Yunhe turned into hatred, he wanted to suppress Ling Yunhe in everything, so he did everything possible to prevent Ling Yunhe from becoming the sect leader. Unfortunately, he made one wrong move and in the end he still lost. Mo Chenga was dumbfounded at first, but soon after, she held back her laughter until her stomach hurt. Immortals in the cultivation world weren't any different from mortals. There were indeed many gossips. At the very least, those who could think of this inside story were definitely not ordinary people. In the end, Mo Chenga ended her conversation with Tan Dongshan with satisfaction. Tan Dongshan received a lot of pointers on cultivation and listened to a lot of news about overseas. From Tan Dongshan, she also learned a lot about the situation of the cultivation groups in Yunzhong. Everyone was happy. Mo Chenga bid farewell to Tan Dongshan with satisfaction. Just as she was about to leave the tea house, she suddenly felt a powerful divine sense fall on her body. She narrowed her eyes. Although this divine sense was powerful, it couldn't completely suppress her, so it wasn't a nascent soul cultivator's divine sense. But if it was a core formation cultivator's divine sense, it was a bit too powerful. It should be known that she cultivated the soul refining art and was now in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Ordinary cultivators in the late stage of the core formation realm might not have a divine sense as strong as hers. However, this divine sense was undoubtedly much stronger than hers. Was this person a friend or a foe? Mo Chenga's mind spun rapidly. If it was an enemy, it didn't seem menacing. But if it was a friend, the unscrupulous probing intent was too obvious. While she was thinking about this, she heard a voice in her ear. Miss, you're obviously a core formation cultivator. Why are you hiding your cultivation level? It was a man's voice that sounded a bit feminine with a gloomy chill. When he spoke, he obviously wasn't in front of her, but his words seemed to be right next to her ear. Emo Chinga paused. With a flash of light, the heaven and earth fan immediately appeared in her hand. She stared fiercely at the room on the right. Along with her movement, the fierce intent in the divine sense, which was still restrained, immediately spread. Emo Chinga suddenly felt a murderous intent surging towards her as if it wanted to suppress her divine sense. In an instant, Emo Chinga's eyes swept around. She opened and closed the heaven and earth fan and tapped the back of her hand. An invisible barrier appeared around her, protecting her tightly. Huh. The man was surprised, but then he smiled. Interesting, really interesting. Emo Chinga also smiled. She tapped the back of her hand with the heaven and earth fan and looked at the room. Fellow Taoist, relying on your powerful divine sense to bully others doesn't seem good, does it? Such an unforeseen event made the attendants in the tea house look at her in surprise, but none of them dared to step forward. Only now did they realize that this seemingly young girl was actually a core formation cultivator. Bully? Ah. Along with the laughter, the door of the room was opened and a black-robed man appeared at the door. He wore a black cloak embroidered with golden silk, looking very gorgeous. He looked young and his face was like the autumn moon. He was unexpectedly very handsome. However, no matter how one looked at him, this handsome young man's fair face exuded a strange aura, and the aura around his body was heavy with devil aura. The late stage of the core formation realm. Emo Chinga's expression was solemn. She stared at this person and cautiously clenched the heaven and earth fan in her hand. This person definitely wasn't a Tao cultivator. From the looks of it, he should be a beast cultivator or a devil cultivator. Seeing her movements, this person smiled slightly. Miss, you're already in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and your divine sense is so powerful. How can you say it's bullying? I'm not sure I can win against you. Emo Chinga snorted coldly. If it's not bullying, you and I don't know each other. Why did you use your divine sense to suppress me? This person blinked and a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. He then bowed and said, if that's the case, it's my fault. I'll apologize to Mississippi. Oh, let me formally introduce myself to Mississippi. My name is Shenhua and people call me Devil Monarch Shenhua. May I know Mrs. Great Name? Chapter 363. After living for 100 years, cultivating to the core formation realm and seeing a lot of cultivators, Emo Chinga discovered one thing. As long as a person had a firm Tao heart, regardless of whether they were men or women, they would always address them as fellow Taoist. However, when they saw them, they would address them as Mississippi. Most of the time, they had the intention of being a man or a woman. For example, when Jing Xingji saw a female cultivator for the first time, he would most likely call her Mississippi. Not only did this Black Moon Devil Monarch address her as Miss, but his attitude was also very attentive. If Emo Chinga couldn't see through his ulterior motives, she'd be playing dumb. However, the situation wasn't clear yet, so it wasn't a bad idea to play dumb. I'm Qin Wei. May I know what advice fellow Taoist Black Moon has for me? Emo Chinga answered faintly. So it's Miss Qin. Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled at her. It is fate that brought us together. If I have offended you just now, I would like to invite you in as an apology. I wonder if you would do me the honor? Inside the room were the auras of several core formation cultivators, both strong and weak. Because the room was protected by a formation, he couldn't sense them very clearly. However, there were at least 5 of them. It was clear that this group of people was having a gathering. However, he didn't know if these people already knew each other, or if they were like the aura refining and foundation establishment cultivators in the hall who came here to interact with each other. If it was the latter, it wouldn't be a problem for her to enter. However, if it was the former, it wouldn't be good. While he was hesitating, his gaze suddenly swept over the attendants around him. These low-level aura refining cultivators were looking at them with trepidation. She thought about it and smiled. She raised her eyebrows and said, since fellow Taoist Shenhua sincerely invites me, I won't refuse. Hearing this, a smile appeared on Black Moon Devil King's coquettish face. He stepped aside and said, Miss Qin, please? With a smile on her face, Emo Chinga put the heaven and earth fan into her sleeve and swaggered into the wing room. What was there to be afraid of? This was the tea house of the Ling family in Sky Snow City. In any case, the Ling family was a large family with a nascent soul cultivator. How could anyone dare to mess around here? Besides, she knew she wasn't a mediocre person. Previously, she obtained so many spiritual treasures from Mo Yaoqing and had already finished refining them, so she had some confidence in protecting herself. Once she entered the side room, Mo Chenga immediately felt everyone's gaze falling on her. Mo Chenga swept her gaze around and saw a huge round table in the middle of the room. Around the table sat 6 cultivators. They were all in the core formation realm. Among them, 5 were in the early stage of the core formation realm, and 1 was in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Including the devil monarch of the mystic moon, he was the only one in the advanced stage of the completion level. When they saw her, a few of them revealed surprised expressions. It was unknown if they were surprised by her youth or her cultivation. This is fellow Daoist Qin? These people all heard the conversation between Mo Tienga and Black Moon Devil Monarch. At that moment, a middle-aged Confucian scholar stood up and politely cupped his hands. Mo Tienga showed a faint smile and returned the salute. Yes. Her gaze shifted, and she cupped her hands towards the people around her as a greeting. When the others saw this, they didn't dare to dally, and they all stood up to return the greeting. At this moment, Mo Tienga had already made up her mind. Among these people there was a scholar in scholarly robes, a bald monk, a beautiful Taoist nun, and there were also people who seemed to be from the devil path. Their outfits were very different, so they probably weren't from the same group. With so many core formation cultivators, it would be too shocking if they were all from the same group. Fellow Daoist Qin, I'm Han Shizhi, a professor at South Zhou's Yushan Academy. Greetings. This was the scholar in scholarly robes who first greeted her. He was the only cultivator in the middle stage of the core formation realm. This poor monk's dharma name is Yuan Kong. I'm the supervisor of South Zhou's Taolin Temple. Although this monk looked fierce, his attitude was actually humble and polite. This poor Taoist is Qing Yunzi, an individual cultivator. This was a middle-aged Taoist with a 3-inch-long beard. He had a very sage-like demeanor. My surname is Yang Qingji. The one who spoke was a devil cultivator whose whole body was hidden in a black cloak. The devil aura around his body was very ostentatious. I'm Yong Ryu and this is my junior martial sister, Chiu Qingrua. We're both cultivators from Danxia sect. Greetings, fellow Daoist Qin. Upon hearing the words Danxia sect, Mo Chenga's eyes brightened. She then shifted her gaze to this pair of martial siblings. Both of them were dressed in Taoist robes. The man was in his 30s and the woman was a bit younger. Both of them were in the early stage of the core formation realm. So you're cultivators from Danxia sect. Her thoughts turned at lightning speed. She immediately greeted the two of them. Her attitude towards this pair of martial siblings from Danxia sect was obviously different from the others. Puzzled, Yong Ryu couldn't help but ask, fellow Daoist Qin, could it be that you know people from my Danxia sect? Mo Tienga smiled. I don't know them. However, my ancestor has some connection with Danxia sect. Chiu Qingrua interrupted and asked, may I know what connection fellow Daoist Qin has with my Danxia sect? Mo Tienga's gaze faintly swept over Chiu Qingrua, who was intentionally or unintentionally holding Yong Ryu's hand. She smiled and said, to be honest, I'm not from Yunzhong. It's just that 1,000 years ago my ancestor was from Yunzhong. I once heard that when my ancestor was in Yunzhong, he received a favor from Danxia sect. Oh, I see. Yong Ryu and Chiu Qingrua glanced at each other but didn't say anything. Although Danxia sect had declined, it was still a great cultivation group with tens of thousands of years of inheritance. This kind of thing was too common. Nevertheless, Devil Monarch Black Moon said with great interest, so Miss Qin isn't from Yunzhong. May I know your origin? Why did your ancestor leave Yunzhong back then? As far as I know, the cultivation resources in the outer endless sea can't compare to those in Yunzhong. Mo Chenga smiled and said faintly, I've only lived for more than 100 years. How could I know what happened 1,000 years ago? I only know a few words passed down by my ancestor, so I only have a rough idea of where they came from. What fellow Daoist Qin said makes sense. The middle-aged scholar Han Shizhi twirled his beard and said with a smile, no matter what your origin is, since fellow Daoist Qin's ancestor was also from Yunzhong, fellow Daoist Qin can also be considered a person from Yunzhong. I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin returned to Yunzhong from the outer endless sea to look for your roots? Yes. Mo Chenga cast a glance at Yong Ryu and her martial sister then nodded with a smile. I've heard about Yunzhong since I was a child. It's been so many years since I've seen it, so I've always wanted to come to Yunzhong. Now, my wish has finally been fulfilled. Haha, in that case we can be considered to be fated. Han Shizhi laughed and said, fellow Taoist Qin, please sit. It's too impolite to keep fellow Taoists standing. Emo Chenga still had a smile on her face. She cupped her hands at the 7 people around her, then calmly picked a seat and sat down. Fellow Taoist Qin. This time the one who spoke was Qin Yunzi. Compared to Han Shizhi, his attitude always carried the estrangement characteristic of individual cultivators. At this moment he cautiously sized up Emo Chenga, then asked, since fellow Taoist cultivation level is in the middle stage of the core formation realm, why are you pretending to be a foundation-building cultivator? If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Xuanyue's secret technique, we would have missed you. Upon hearing this question, the 7 people's gazes all fell on her. Emo Chenga knew that although they politely invited her in and greeted her, they were still wary of her. She calmly said with a smile, to be honest, although my ancestors all came from Yunzhong for more than 1,000 years, almost no other ancestors have set foot here, so I know nothing about Yunzhong. Before I left this time, my master repeatedly warned me to be careful and not to think I can run amok just because I have a small cultivation level. There are many talented people in Yunzhong, and every cultivator has extraordinary strength. I mustn't offend others just because I have some magic weapons. Because of this, when I arrived in Yunzhong, I was unfamiliar with the people and the place, so I didn't dare to rashly reveal my cultivation level. What she said was half true and half false. Before she left, Lord Taoist Jinghe indeed warned her to be careful when she went to Yunzhong, which was separated by the ocean. However, Lord Taoist Jinghe was a flamboyant person, so it was impossible for him to say things like not to offend others. Nevertheless, the core formation cultivators present didn't know this. They only felt what Emo Chenga said was reasonable. Moreover, everyone could hear the admiration she had for Yunzhong in her words. Everyone felt that it was very useful, so they let go of their guard against her. I see. Fellow Taoist Qin is really cautious. But in fact you don't have to. We cultivators in Yunzhong, whether we're Taoists, Confucians, Buddhists, or devils, don't have any deep hatred. We always don't offend others if they don't offend us. As long as fellow Taoist Qin didn't do anything taboo, we won't show hostility to others at will. Emo Chenga smiled apologetically. Just now, I chatted with a little friend in the hall for a while, so I also learned about this. It's just that I didn't expect fellow Taoist Xuanyue to see through my disguise before I left. Speaking of this, I'm very curious. I'm not boasting, but my breath-concealing technique is passed down from my ancestors. Even nascent soul seniors might not be able to see through it. How did fellow Taoist Xuanyue know my real cultivation level at first sight? This was indeed something Emo Chenga was surprised about. It was fine if Ling Yunhe saw through it. In fact, he only inferred she wasn't a foundation-building cultivator from the aura of spiritual treasures on her body and didn't really see through it. However, Devil Monarch Xuanyue was different. His divine sense was very strong, even stronger than hers, who cultivated the soul-refining art. He seemed to be able to see through her cultivation level directly. This was unusual. Her spirit-concealing pendant was refined by a deification senior. Zhong Muling even clearly said that with the spirit-concealing pendant on her, it wouldn't be a problem even if she wanted to pretend to be immortal. It didn't make sense for a core formation devil cultivator to see through her disguise so easily. After they returned to the wing room, Devil Monarch Xuanyue, who had been sitting at the corner of the round table and playing with a teacup, chuckled softly. His gaze swept over Emo Chenga and he reached out to stroke his hair narcissistically. He then said, "What's so strange about this? Miss Qin is a Dao cultivator, so you don't understand the matters of us devil cultivators. We devil cultivators naturally have some secret techniques that are very different from you Dao cultivators. To be honest, Miss Qin, your breath-concealing technique is very outstanding. You've been in the hall for so long, but I've never noticed it. However, before we left, you unintentionally released your divine sense, and divine sense happens to be the field I'm most proficient in. So I noticed it." What he said was equivalent to not saying anything. However, Emo Chenga also knew that some secret techniques would never be taught to outsiders, not even to devil cultivators. Nevertheless, at least she knew what she had overlooked. Devil Monarch Xuanyue mentioning divine sense made her realize that she was indeed a bit conceited about her divine sense being superior to others, so she unintentionally released it. Just now, before she left, she just swept the entire tea house with her divine sense out of habit. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have noticed it at all. However, Devil Monarch Xuanyue's divine sense was astonishing, so he saw through her. It seemed she still had to be a bit more cautious. Even if she had the spirit-concealing pendant, she still had to do other things flawlessly. Chapter 364. As it turns out, fellow Taoist Blackman's divine sense is outstanding and you also have a secret technique. I was conceited, Mo Chinga flattered Devil Monarch Black Moon with a faint smile. The Black Moon demonic monarch's eyes wandered about, looking very pleased with himself. It was unknown whether or not he was deliberately showing off. This time, Mo Chinga finally saw through him. This devil cultivator was naturally narcissistic. He always had to maintain a natural and unrestrained demeanor. He wasn't deliberately trying to seduce her alone. If that was the case, it wouldn't be hard to get along with him. Then the 8 of them exchanged some polite words with each other. Finally, the Black Moon Devil Monarch coughed and pulled the topic back. He swept his gaze over everyone before finally resting his gaze on Mo Chinga. Miss Chin, just now, the 7 of us were exchanging spiritual objects. I wonder if you're interested? When she said that, the 7 of them looked at her again. Han Shiji said with a smile, most of us gathered here to look for treasures. Since fellow Taoist Chin came from the outer endless sea, I presume that the spirit items you have are very different from us cloud cultivators. Perhaps we both have something that the other party urgently needs. Exactly. Qing Yunzi smiled. I wonder if fellow Taoist Chin came from Shaoyang or Yuan province. I once wanted to go to the outer endless sea but I couldn't get away. Until now, I have only been to the inner endless sea. The internal sea referred to the sea area where some islands near Yunzhong were located. These sea areas were often the strongholds for cultivators to catch sea beasts, such as North Pole Island. As for the external sea, it referred to places like Yuan Province and Shaoyang, which were separated from Yunzhong Ocean. Mo Chinga just smiled and softly changed the topic. The place I came from is a bit different from Shaoyang and Yuanzhou. However, perhaps there really is something you need there. Hearing this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch said, since Miss Chin doesn't object, does that mean you'll be participating in the exchange? Mo Chinga nodded, indicating she had no objections. The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and glanced at the crowd. He continued, before Lady Chin joined us, we just finished talking about cultivation. Since that's the case, let's begin. A trade fair organized by cultivators was naturally different from the one organized by Shang clan. No one was introducing treasures and no one was stirring up the atmosphere. Among them, the mystic moon demonic monarch had the highest cultivation, so he tacitly agreed to be the host. After saying this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch threw out a few items and said casually, see if you're interested in these items. You can exchange them with items or buy them with spirit stones. Mo Chinga looked down and saw several kinds of ores, spiritual plants, and a magic weapon on the table. The cultivation method of fiendish cultivators was different from that of Taoist cultivators. Therefore, the materials needed for elixirs and spiritual treasures were different from those for Taoist cultivators. These spiritual herbs and minerals were good materials for Taoist cultivators to refine elixirs and spiritual treasures, but they were not very useful for fiendish cultivators. This was even more so for Dharma treasures. Therefore, the Black Moon Devil Monarch did not even bat an eye when he threw these things out. Ores and spiritual plants were all good things, but Mo Chinga didn't need them. Nevertheless, that magic weapon made her take a few more glances at it. This magic treasure looked like a mottled embroidered sword. There was a lot of dust on it, but it faintly exuded an extraordinary aura of wind and thunder. She couldn't figure out what was going on with this magic treasure. If it was really a spiritual treasure, it shouldn't have such mottled embroidery, right? It wasn't like it was an ordinary iron from the secular world. But if it was an ordinary object, how could it have such a strong aura? Ordinary magic treasures would only have such an aura when they were in use. Just by throwing it here, it already had such an aura. Almost only a magic treasure with a spirit would have such an aura. The ores and spiritual plants were quickly exchanged by the other people. In the end, everyone's eyes were on this magic treasure. Like Mo Chinga, they couldn't figure out the details of this magic treasure. For a moment they hesitated, not knowing whether they should exchange it or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said leisurely to the crowd, is everyone not interested in this Fuxing sword? His words stunned everyone. Yong Ruyu and Qiu Qingrua looked shocked. Even Qing Yunzi, Yuan Kong, and the others' expressions froze. They stared motionlessly at the rusted sword on the table. Fuxing sword? Could it be Senior Fu Yao's Fuxing sword? Yong Ruyu stared at the rusted sword and asked nervously. The Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyebrows and showed a faint smile. Otherwise, fellow Taoist Yong, do you think there's another Fuxing sword? After getting an affirmative answer, everyone's expressions became more interesting. Yong Ruyu, Qiu Qingrua, and Qing Yunzi looked nervous, while Yuan Kong and Han Shiji looked awed. Mo Chenga was confused. Fuxing sword? Fuyao? What's that? Black Moon Devil Monarch cast a glance at her and showed a bewitching smile. Miss Qin, you're not from Yunzhong, so it seems you've never heard of the Fuxing sword and Fuyaozi? Mo Chenga nodded. I haven't been in Yunzhong for long, so I've never heard of them. May I know what this Fuxing sword is? And who is Fuyaozi? Fuxing sword is Senior Fuyaozi's sword. The one who answered was Yong Ruyu. He took a deep breath and calmed down a little. He looked at Mo Chenga and said, Senior Fuyaozi is a legendary senior expert in Yunzhong. He was a cultivator from tens of thousands of years ago. He didn't belong to any sect and was just an individual cultivator. Relying on his divine power, he moved unhindered in Yunzhong. Even the cultivators from Yuanzhou and Shaoyang City had to bow down to him. When he was alive, the Devil Path and the Tao couldn't coexist. Because of him, the Devil Path was suppressed to the point where it almost had no place to stand. According to the ancient records, when he was still in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he fought 10 nascent soul devil monarchs alone and didn't show any signs of losing. In the end, those 10 devil monarchs had to retreat to the Sea of Returning Ruins. Not only that, Qing Yunzi's expression was full of reverence as he continued to say, although he was an individual cultivator, he created a whole set of cultivation techniques for Tao cultivators and passed them on to the world. He also shared his cultivation experience with the public without reservation, allowing many individual cultivators to walk on the right path of cultivation. In the past tens of thousands of years, although Senior Fuyaozi didn't pass down his cultivation group and didn't have any disciples, countless cultivators benefited from him and called themselves his successors. At this point, Qing Yunzi added, this humble Taoist is the same. There's actually such a person in Yunzhong? Mo Chenga was greatly astonished. The path of cultivation was full of thorns and thorns. It was normal for cultivators to kill each other. Cultivation experience was a cultivator's secret, but he actually made it all public. It was really shocking. The Senior Fuyaozi isn't just that. Han Shiji answered with a smile. He was a professor at the academy, so his knowledge was naturally extensive. As far as I know, this Senior Fuyaozi not only has tyrannical strength, but he also has a unique understanding of morality. I once read about Senior Fuyaozi's morality in an ancient book. It's very different from the fellow Taoists who cultivate the Tao today. This Senior Fuyaozi believes that cultivators have more power than mortals, so they should bear more responsibility. When a kind of power loses its restraints, it will affect the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, not only should cultivators not kill each other, but they should also help each other. Mo Chenga was stunned. She muttered, shouldn't kill each other but should also help each other, correct. Qing Yunzi sighed and said, Senior Fuyaozi has always held this kind of philosophy all his life. Even if he once killed someone, he could still let go of the enmity with a smile. He's really magnanimous. This kind of broad-mindedness has never been seen in Yunzhong for more than 100,000 years. He can actually cultivate to the nascent soul realm? Mo Chenga was very shocked. Could such a person really walk to the end of the path of cultivation? Not just the nascent soul realm, Yong Ryu said. Senior Fuyaozi has always been moving unhindered in Yunzhong. It's said that he finally advanced to the deification realm. However, this is only a legend. There are many different opinions about Senior Fuyaozi's final outcome in ancient books, so no one knows which one is true. But one thing is certain. Black Moon Devil Monarch answered. He seemed to be very disapproving of Yong Ryu, Qing Yunzi, and the others' words, and his expression was very unhappy. Fuyaozi is the idol of all cultivators in Yunzhong. Just now Yong Ryu said that in the era Fuyaozi lived in, Yunzhong's Tao and Devil Monarchs were irreconcilable, and Fuyaozi once defeated 10 Devil Monarchs. Black Moon Devil Monarch was a devil cultivator, so he naturally didn't like Fuyaozi. However, no matter how much he disliked him, he had to admit that Fuyaozi's strength was indeed outstanding. I see. Mo Chenga was very fascinated. Unfortunately, this Senior Fuyaozi lived tens of thousands of years ago. Otherwise, I really want to see his elegant demeanor. We Tao cultivators are all like this. Seeing her fascinated expression, Yong Ryu immediately felt close to her, so she said with a smile. However, Qiu Qingrua glared at her angrily and pinched her hand. Seeing this scene, Mo Chenga couldn't help but smile. No matter how clumsy her eyes were, she could see that this pair of martial brother and sister had a relationship. Now that her heart belonged to someone else, she naturally wouldn't provoke others. However, this Qiu Qingrua was too nervous. Could it be that just because a woman said something to Yong Ryu, she would suspect that she had a disloyal heart? Yong Ryu didn't seem to notice it at all. Her gaze once again fell on the Fuxing sword on the table. Fellow Taoist Black Moon, where did you get this Fuxing sword? If it's Senior Fu Yaozi's relic, it must be extremely expensive. Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyelids and said, I obtained this sword by accident. After many verifications, I confirmed that it was Fu Yaozi's Fuxing sword. I asked many Devil Path seniors, and this sword disappeared when the 10 Devil Monarchs fought Fu Yao. It was probably left in the Devil Domain at that time. You don't need to be so scared. Although the Fuxing sword is powerful, this sword isn't the complete Fuxing sword. Hearing this, Qingyunzi was stunned and asked anxiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, what do you mean? Black Moon Devil Monarch said lazily, do you think this sword will still be full of spiritual aura after tens of thousands of years and being corroded by devil aura in the Devil Domain? Yong Ryu and the others were stunned, but the excited expressions on their faces calmed down a little. Yes, the Devil Domain was full of devil aura. If this treasure was left in the Devil Domain, it would definitely be corroded by the devil aura. After tens of thousands of years, it was already rare that it didn't turn into a pile of ordinary iron. Qingyunzi thought for a moment then asked cautiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, do you think this sword can still be used? Since I took it out to trade, it's naturally still useful, Black Moon Devil Monarch said faintly. Speaking of which, this sword is worthy of being Fu Yaozi's sword. After being corroded by devil aura for tens of thousands of years, it unexpectedly still retains the momentum of a spiritual treasure. Of course, everyone here understands that this sword definitely can't be used directly. It needs to dissolve the devil aura and be refined again to recover some of its original power, but only a little. Chapter 365. A sword from tens of thousands of years ago that had been stored in the Devil's Domain where devil cultivators lived for tens of thousands of years couldn't be intact. Yong Ryu and Qingyunzi also understood this point, but they still couldn't hide their disappointment after hearing Black Moon Devil Monarch's words. This was Fu Yaozi's sword, but it still had this kind of momentum. One could imagine how powerful it was in the past. Of course, if it hadn't been corroded by devil aura, nascent soul cultivators wouldn't have had the chance to take a fancy to core formation cultivators like them. After figuring this out, the two of them regained some of their composure. Qingyunzi looked at the sword and asked cautiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, what do you want to exchange this sword for? How many spirit stones do you want? Black Moon Devil Monarch played with the spirit stones he had just exchanged and said casually, we devil cultivators are different from you righteous cultivators. We need a special mental cultivation method to absorb spirit stones for our own use. Usually we just use them like money. So you don't have to exchange them for spirit stones. If you see something suitable for devil cultivators, just give it to me. When he finished speaking, Qingyunzi and Yong Ryu both had a troubled expression on their faces. It wasn't easy to find things for devil cultivators. After all, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was the main source of energy for devil cultivators. In the beginning, devil cultivators used spiritual aura for their cultivation. Later, devil cultivators gathered in one place to cultivate, and the devil's domain was full of devil aura. Things that could be directly used by devil cultivators usually grew in devil's domain. There weren't many devil's domains in Yunzhong, only some specific places in northern Qilin Nation. The devil's domain was small and didn't have many resources. If there were, they would have been taken away by the local devil cultivators. They were pure Dao cultivators, so where could they get things for devil cultivators? Devil Monarch Black Moon obviously understood their difficulties, but he didn't back down. He picked up the rusty Fuxing sword, cast a sidelong glance at the two of them, then looked at Mo Tiange. Miss Qin is also a cultivator. Are you interested in this Fuxing sword? Mo Tiange glanced at Yong Ryu and Qingyunzi then said, I'm naturally interested, but fellow Taoist Yong and fellow Taoist Qingyun are very interested in this sword. I've only just arrived here, so how could I snatch it away? He paused for a moment before continuing, moreover, it's really hard to find demonic cultivators' items. I'm afraid that fellow Taoist Shenyue won't be interested in the things I have on me. The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and said, what's wrong with that? It's up to me whether I like him or not. Since Miss Qin has participated in our trade fair, she naturally has the qualifications to exchange. Fellow Taoists, don't you think so? The Black Moon Devil Monarch was in the late stage of the core formation realm, while Yong Ryu and Qingyunzi were only in the early stage of the core formation realm. How could they dare to act tough in front of him? Moreover, what the Black Moon Devil Monarch said made sense. The trade fair was free to trade, and it was all up to the owner's preference. Seeing the two of them nod, the Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said, "All right, what do you have, Miss Qin? You can take it out and let us see." Mo Chenga hesitated for a moment, but in the end she still took something out of her robe. She'd been to Demonic Mountain before. Demonic Mountain used to be the battlefield of the Righteous Path and the Devil Path. Countless treasures of the Righteous Path and the Devil Path were left there. Although most of them had been taken away by the predecessors, there were always some special things in that place where devil aura intertwined. She picked up a lot of people's Chenkuan bags inside. She wasn't interested in these things, so he practically put them all into her pocket. There were some strange things produced on Demonic Mountain, but she didn't know much about devil cultivators, so she didn't know whether these things were useful or whether Black Moon Devil Monarch would like them or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch watched as she took out a Chenkuan bag from her robe and took out things one by one. At first, his expression was indifferent, probably because these things didn't catch his eye. But as Mo Chenga took out more and more things, the Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression gradually became a bit surprised. When she took out one thing, he actually stood up abruptly. Mo Chenga stopped. The thing she took out was a jade box with a small black flower inside. She didn't know what it was, but she felt the devil aura was very heavy. She looked at Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression and thought this must be some kind of treasure to be able to shock a core formation devil cultivator so much. It was to the extent that even the other devil cultivator, Yang Qingji, who had not made a sound and was quietly sitting in the corner, moved his body, his gaze fixed on her hand. "This thing. Does fellow Taoist Black Moon like it?" Black Moon Devil Monarch exhaled and slowly recovered his bewitching and narcissistic expression. He nodded and said, "This flower is called Devil Gathering Flower. It can only grow in places where devil aura is very abundant. The flower in Miss Qin's hand is at least 2,000 years old. It's enough to exchange for this Fuxing sword." Mo Chenga nodded and smiled. "Fortunately, if it still doesn't work, I'll have to give up. Does fellow Taoist Black Moon mean you're willing to exchange the Fuxing sword for this Devil Gathering Flower?" "Of course." Black Moon Devil Monarch simply threw the Fuxing sword in his hand to her. "This sword belongs to Mississippi." Mo Chenga closed the jade box and also threw it to Black Moon Devil Monarch. The two of them confirmed it and the transaction was completed. Both Yong Ryu and Qing Yun Zi sighed when they saw this. This fellow Taoist Qin was also a Tao cultivator. Since she heard about the Fuxing sword's origin, she naturally wouldn't give it to her. The two of them could be considered to have missed the opportunity to obtain the Fuxing sword. After Black Moon Devil Monarch and Mo Chenga finished their transaction, Yang Qingji, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke and stopped Mo Chenga from putting the things away. "Fellow Taoist Qin, these things are all devil cultivators' things. Are you willing to exchange them?" Mo Chenga smiled. "Of course. I'm a Tao cultivator. What use do I have for these things?" Yang Qingji thought for a moment, then opened his Chenkuan bag and threw several things out. "Then fellow Taoist Qin, take a look. Do you need these things?" Mo Chenga stared at the things Yang Qingji threw on the table. They were all beast cores, most of which were 5th and 6th rank. There were more than a dozen of them. This surprised Mo Chenga a bit. Yang Qingji was only in the early stage of the core formation realm, but he actually had so many 5th and 6th rank beast cores. Apparently his skills were quite extraordinary. She once heard that although Devil Path cultivators were prone to chi energy deviation, their fighting abilities were stronger than Righteous Path cultivators in the same realm. She was skeptical at first, but now that she saw Yang Qingji taking out so many beast cores so easily, it was most likely true. These beast cores made the others very envious. Even Han Shiji gasped in admiration several times. Beast cores were one of the few things that didn't belong to the Righteous Path or the Devil Path. Both Righteous Path and Devil Path cultivators could use them. The difference was that Righteous Path cultivators mostly used them to concoct medicinal pills, while Devil Path cultivators mostly swallowed them directly. It wasn't that she didn't want these beast cores, they were equivalent to medicinal pills. She also learned the method of directly taking beast cores from Bishuan Court, so she could use them all no matter how many she had. However, the problem was that she didn't know the value of these devil cultivator things in her hands, so she didn't know how to exchange them. She thought for a moment, then said, "What does fellow Taoist Yang want to exchange for?" Yang Qingji's expression couldn't be clearly seen under his cloak. He said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you should know the value of these beast cores. They're enough to exchange for most of the things on the table. If fellow Taoist Qin trusts me, Are you willing to let me choose for myself? Mo Chenga only considered it for a moment before she smiled and agreed. Sure. Yang Qingji nodded. Thank you. As he spoke, he raised his hand. The things on the table flew towards him one by one as if they were being pulled. By the time most of the things were in his hands, he pushed his hand forward, throwing the beast cores on the table towards Mo Chenga. Mo Chenga caught all of them. She only took a brief look at the quality of the beast cores, then threw them into her Chengkuan bag. She then put away the remaining things on the table. After this transaction was completed, the scene was silent for a while. Because the things Devil Monarch Black Moon took out were too astonishing, the people behind him simply couldn't muster up the spirit to continue the transaction. In the end, it was Devil Monarch Black Moon who broke the silence. He asked Mo Chenga in a seemingly careless manner, "This monarch can see that Miss Qin is a pure Dao cultivator, so why do you have so many things used by devil cultivators? Could it be that Mrs. Hometown is also the devil domain?" Mo Chenga smiled faintly, then shook her head. "Since fellow Taoist Black Moon knows I'm a pure Dao cultivator, why would I live in the devil domain? I just had a conflict with several devil cultivators and obtained these things from them." Oh, so that's how it is. What she meant was that these things were obtained from killing devil cultivators. Although she had a lot of things in her hands, they were very messy, so their total value wasn't very high. It would be believable if she said they were the possessions of one or two devil cultivators. In the current Yunzhong continent, the situation was no longer one where the righteous and devil paths could not coexist, so Devil Monarch Black Moon and Yang Qingji didn't react to what she said. Devil Monarch Black Moon was very happy to obtain the treasures he was satisfied with. He squinted at the others and said, "All right, Miss Qin has finished her transaction with us. Which fellow Taoist wants to exchange with us next?" After a moment of silence, Monk Yuan Kong called out the name of Buddha. "Amit Ba, this poor monk has something to exchange." Devil Monarch Black Moon didn't even bother to say anything. He just stretched out his hand, signaling him to take out the item. Monk Yuan Kong also didn't waste any time. He directly took out a jade box and opened it. In an instant, the whole room was filled with a dazzling 7-colored light. 7-colored jade heart lotus. Han Shizhi cried out in surprise. Mo Chenga still didn't know anything about this item. However, judging by how it was overflowing with spiritual aura, she knew it was an extremely rare spiritual item. Moreover, Han Shizhi looked so shocked. Benefactor Han has good eyes. This is indeed the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Monk Yuan Kong smiled faintly. Although his appearance was very ugly and looked quite ferocious, his smile was filled with a kind and holy feeling. Perhaps this is the so-called Buddha's nature? Mo Chenga thought to herself. What does Master Yuan Kong want to exchange for? The one who spoke was Qiu Qingrua. She stared unblinkingly at the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Ever since Mo Chenga entered the room, this was the first time this beautiful Taoist nun acted like a cultivator instead of a wife strictly supervising her husband. Monk Yuan Kong still smiled faintly and said in a neither hurried nor slow manner, "Benefactor Qiu, this poor monk already said that in my early years, my sins of killing were very heavy. Now I'm plagued by a demonic barrier and it's difficult for me to advance my cultivation. Therefore, I want to exchange this item for something that can reduce my sins of killing and remove my demonic barrier. Benefactor, do you have it?" Chapter 366. In the end, Monk Yuan Kong's 7-colored jade heart lotus was exchanged by Yong Ryu with a Buddhist treasure. Qiu Qingrua happily put the 7-colored jade heart lotus into his bag. Qing Yunzi took a fancy to the Fuxing sword while Han Shizhi took a fancy to the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Soon after, the two of them took out their own things and exchanged some passable spiritual objects with others. The core formation cultivators were very straightforward, and there were only 8 people present, so the trade fair ended very quickly. Then everyone began to talk about cultivation. This process was an eye-opener for Mo Chenga. It was the first time she met devil cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, and Confucian cultivators above the core formation realm. The experiences of Black Moon Devil Monarch, Yang Qingji, Monk Yuan Kong, and Han Shizhi were completely different from what she had heard before. No matter what Dao they walked, they were all cultivators, so they had quite a lot in common, which helped Mo Chenga figure out some difficult cultivation problems. This conversation lasted for half the night before Mo Chenga bid farewell to everyone and left the tea house. When she stepped out of the tea house, the full moon was already hanging in the sky. The night was dark and countless stars were blinking in the sky, reflecting the bright blue color of Sky Snow City, giving it a different kind of beauty. She admired it for a while before slowly walking towards the cave on Whitestone Mountain. She looked leisurely, but in fact, her fists were clenched and hidden in her sleeves, hiding her excitement very well. When she got the Fuxing sword, her attitude was very calm and she didn't look very excited, but in fact, her heart was full of excitement. As soon as she left the tea house, she couldn't suppress it anymore. That sword was definitely unusual. Not to mention that it was corroded by devil aura for 10,000 years without being completely corroded. Its momentum alone could only be found on some spiritual treasures. If she could find a way to wash away the devil aura and restore it to its former glory, it would definitely be an extremely sharp magic weapon. With this thought she smiled. One could never have too many spiritual treasures. Although her cultivation level was exposed this time, her harvest was quite plentiful. Just as she left the streets of Sky Snow City and before she reached Whitestone Mountain, she suddenly felt her back tighten. Instinctively, the heaven and earth fan appeared in her hand. With a light wave, a spiritual aura barrier appeared around her. Soon after, with a soft chi sound, something tore open the spiritual energy barrier behind her. Emo Chinga tapped the ground with the tip of her foot. Clouds appeared on the soles of her feet as her cloud-treading boots flew up. Like a willow in the wind, she streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of drifting traces in the air. In the end she turned around and stopped. Which fellow Taoist launched a sneak attack on me? Please show yourself. Standing in midair, Emo Chinga gently tapped the heaven and earth fan in her hand and looked around sharply. Umph. She heard a cold snort. Someone spoke in a hoarse voice, "Hand over the Fuxing sword and I'll let you go." Supporting life sword? Emo Chinga was stunned. It wasn't that she didn't expect someone would covet the Fuxing sword. It was just that she didn't expect they would come knocking on her door so soon. Who was this person? Yong Ryu or Qing Yunzi? The two of them didn't have any abnormalities just now. Could it be someone else? On top of that, this person's sneak attack was very precise. His cultivation level was at least of the intermediate stage of the completion level. Could it be Han Shiji? Not giving her much time to think, another sharp spiritual energy suddenly appeared in the air and attacked her. Emo Chinga also let out a cold snort. No matter who it was, this person looked down on her too much. Emo Chinga touched her sleeve and waved the white silk handkerchief. A faintly discernible mist enveloped her. The spiritual aura smoothly entered the mist, but in the next moment, it disappeared into the mist and disappeared without a trace. Oh. The person was surprised but soon sneered. You do have some skills. I underestimated you. Emo Chinga showed a faint smile, gently opened the heaven and earth fan and said, "No matter who you are, if you don't want to die, you'd better scram quickly." Upon hearing what she said, the person burst into laughter. Interesting. Are all cultivators in the outer endless sea as arrogant as you? Whether I'm arrogant or not, I'll know after I fight you. Emo Chinga's gaze turned slightly cold. It seems your excellency is determined to rob me? So what if I rob you? The Fuxing sword, even if it's just a Fuxing sword that can only recover a little of its power, it's still no small matter. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being too bold. People from the outer endless sea actually dare to carry such a treasure in Yunzhong. Even if I don't do it, someone else will. Then let's see how you do it. Before he finished speaking, the heaven and earth fan unfolded, and seemingly invisible mountains and rivers sprayed out in an instant. The person didn't expect Emo Chinga to act so quickly. Before he finished speaking, she had already used her magic weapon. In the darkness, a black thing splashed over, trying to block the mountains and rivers transformed by the heaven and earth fan. Emo Chinga smiled slightly and withdrew the mountains and rivers. Like a flash of lightning, she retreated dozens of feet away. With a crane cry, a red-crowned crane rushed out of the heaven and earth fan and pecked at her right side. With a cry of alarm, a figure suddenly appeared in the darkness. This person was also very fast. With a flash, he was already dozens of feet away, blocking the red-crowned crane with a huge stone. Emo Chinga waved the fan lightly, and the red-crowned crane disappeared without a trace. She smiled at the person in the darkness. "Professor Han, it's really you." Dozens of feet away, Han Shiji glared at Emo Chinga with a gloomy expression. Just now, although he blocked the red-crowned crane's attack in time, Emo Chinga was simply a diversion. She used flying needles to launch a sneak attack under the crane's cover. Although she didn't really succeed, the feeling of almost being hit was really bad. Han Shiji always thought the level of the cultivators in the outer endless sea couldn't compare to the cultivators in Yunzhong, so he boldly came to attack her. He didn't expect Mo Tiange to have so many magic weapons in her hands. Not only did she easily dodge his rhino telepathy, but she also unexpectedly launched a sneak attack on him. He almost died because of his own carelessness. But from now on he wouldn't be careless anymore. With the golden brush and jade inkstone in his hands, even if this woman had many magic weapons he wouldn't lose. Mo Tiange didn't attack immediately. She looked at Han Shiji and asked with a smile, "Professor Han, I don't quite understand. Aren't you a Confucian cultivator? The Fuxing sword is a Taoist cultivator's item. What do you want it for?" Han Shiji snorted coldly. "What do you know? How can magic weapons be divided by schools? Confucian cultivators, Taoist cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, don't they all transform spiritual aura for their own use?" Mo Tiange was stunned. She didn't expect he would actually say this. She carefully pondered it in her heart and suddenly felt enlightened. For a moment she came to a sudden realization and understood. Yes, Confucian cultivators, Taoist cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, and even devil cultivators were all cultivators. Although their respective doctrines were different, their cultivation methods were different, and their methods of transforming spiritual aura were also different. There wasn't much difference in essence. They all cultivated and similarly transformed the spiritual aura of heaven and earth for their own use. They also strengthened their bodies, cultivated their meridians and dantian, and advanced their realms step by step to pursue the ultimate goal of ascension. She was too trapped by the views of schools. She always felt that cultivators of other Daos might be able to learn a thing or two from them, but they were always different. In fact, their essence should be the same, but their external situations were different. Looking at Han Shiji in the darkness, she had a mysterious feeling. This Han Shiji came to snatch her treasures and even to kill her. His words were very ruthless, so it was obvious that his previous erudition and elegance were all fake. In fact, he was a ruthless person. However, this person had such a deep understanding of morality, almost seeing through the true meaning of cultivators of various Daos. His unintentional words suddenly made her feel as if her state of mind had transcended. She didn't know whether she should thank this person or not. Professor Han is really a knowledgeable person. You can actually comprehend this kind of truth. That being the case, why is your state of mind so weak? Sneak attacks aren't magnanimous. Don't you Confucian cultivators pursue upright conduct and firm will? Aren't you afraid of having inner demons? Han Shiji smiled contemptuously and looked at Mo Tiange. You don't need to talk so eloquently. You only know a little bit about us Confucian cultivators' cultivation methods. What inner demons? It's nothing more than acting against one's own morality. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Although your cultivation level isn't bad, you're just a silly little girl. Being looked down upon like this, Mo Tiange didn't show any anger. She pondered Han Shiji's words. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Is that really the case? If devil path cultivators didn't cultivate their minds, it was easy for them to suffer from chi deviation, but they could also ascend and become devils. Many nascent soul cultivators in the celestial pole were afraid of inner demons, so they wouldn't harm people's lives for no reason. Even their temperamental master was the same. However, the number one late nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole was Master Song Feng, that fiend. The reason was actually this simple. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Because cultivators like them were instilled with the concept of don't lightly harm people's lives and be careful of inner demons since childhood, they always believed that if they hurt people for no reason, they would have inner demons. Because of this, when they hurt people for no reason, they would be trapped by inner demons. Master Song Feng said he was neither a Tao nor a devil, neither a human nor a ghost. In other words, his concept was different from that of cultivators. Could it be that because he didn't have any morality in his heart, he didn't have any inner demons even if he violated them, so he could become the number one late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole by hook or by crook? Mo Tiange fell into contemplation. Han Shiji smiled coldly and suddenly pulled out his hand. The ink brush and the jade inkstone flew out at the same time. Fellow Taoist Qin. Just as the ink brush was about to splash on Mo Tiange's body, a clear shout was heard. Someone flew out and a lightning-like light instantly blocked the ink brush. That person stretched out his hand, and a crescent-shaped jade knife flew back into his hand. His figure was already in front of Mo Tiange. You. Seeing the apricot-colored Taoist robe this person was wearing, Han Shiji was shocked. You're? Under the moonlight, this person's cold gaze fell on Han Shiji. He said heavily, Han Shiji? You came to my Sky Snow City and killed people in my Ling clan's territory. Aren't you looking down on my Ling clan too much? Under this person's cold gaze, Han Shizhi's ruthless expression slowly disappeared. He exhaled and said, "Since fellow Taoist Ling made a move, I won't say much. Today's matter will end here." Wait. Seeing that Han Shizhi was about to turn around and leave, this person shouted. He stared at Han Shizhi with a gloomy expression. "You want to leave just like that?" Han Shizhi paused, then turned around and said faintly, "Ling Yunhe, I gave up this matter to give face to Ling clan. What about you? Don't tell me you want a foot after giving me an inch?" Under the moonlight, Ling Yunhe's expression was gloomy. "Give face to Ling clan? You're casually making a move on my Ling clan's territory. Is this still giving face to Ling clan? Otherwise what?" Han Shizhi's expression was still indifferent. "You also know you can't do anything to me, so why stop me?" As he said that, he actually waved his sleeves and swaggered away. In the end, Ling Yunhe didn't stop him. Chapter 367. Looking at Ling Yunhe's expression, Mo Qiange was a bit uncertain about his relationship with Han Shizhi. They recognized each other as soon as they saw each other, so they were obviously old acquaintances. Moreover, there was a sense of familiarity in their conversation, as if they knew each other's situation very well. It seemed they had known each other for a long time. They didn't seem to be enemies or friends. They both feared each other deeply, but they didn't intend to be enemies. However, since Ling Yunhe helped her, he wasn't her enemy for now. Fellow Taoist Ling, Mo Qiange quickly smiled. "Thank you for helping me, fellow Taoist Ling." Ling Yunhe withdrew his gaze and waved at her. "Even if I didn't make a move, fellow Taoist Qin wouldn't have lost to Han. You don't have to thank me." Mo Qiange smiled. Her impression of this cloud-soaring crane became even more favorable. Although Han Shizhi's strength was extraordinary, she was confident she wouldn't lose. However, Ling Yunhe scared him away, which saved her a lot of effort. After all, Han Shizhi wasn't an ordinary person. If they really fought, it would be difficult for her to come out unscathed. The most rare thing was that Ling Yunhe helped her but didn't take credit for it. From this point of view, he was a smart person. He didn't force her to repay his kindness, but he made Mo Qiange have a good impression of him. Therefore, she inevitably had to think about the matter of Carefree Valley. "Why are you here, fellow Taoist Ling?" Mo Qiange asked. "Could it be that you couldn't sleep at night and came out to take a walk?" She said this with a smile. They were both core formation cultivators, so why would they need to sleep? Ling Yunhe knew she was teasing him. He also smiled and said, "If cultivators didn't need to sleep, I really wouldn't have been able to sleep." Mo Qiange didn't expect to get such an answer. She was startled, but she guessed why he said that, so she hesitated. Ling Yunhe helped her just now, so she should express her concern. However, if she continued to talk about it, it would inevitably involve Ling clan's secrets. She came to Yunzhong to see the scenery and make friends with Yunzhong's cultivators, but she didn't want to get involved in these grudges. Since he was able to become a candidate for the sect leader, Ling Yunhe was naturally a sensitive person. As soon as he saw her expression, he thought of a reason. He smiled indifferently and changed the topic. "How did fellow Taoist Qin offend Han Shizhi?" This person is a professor of the southern Zhou country's Yushan Academy. He is famous for his ruthlessness and for hiding a dagger in his smile. Although fellow Taoist Qin's methods are extraordinary, you might not be able to guard against this person's sneak attack. Really? Upon hearing what he said, Mo Qiange became a bit curious about Han Shizhi. As far as I know, most Confucian cultivators cultivate their minds and cultivate their character. Why does Han Shizhi have such a personality? Ling Yunhe shook his head and let out a sigh. Although this Han Shizhi has a vicious personality, he is a genius in terms of cultivation. He liked to walk the unorthodox path, but he was very good at studying Confucian scriptures. What he cultivates is a Confucian mental cultivation method, but it is a mental cultivation method that he has researched and created himself. What? Mo Qiange was shocked. He's only in the core formation realm, but he can already create his own cultivation method? She couldn't be blamed for being so shocked. Creating a cultivation method wasn't a simple matter. The cultivation methods that existed in the cultivation world today were either adapted from cultivation methods left over from the Middle Ages era, or they were created by some big sects after several generations of patching and patching. Although some cultivation methods were created by cultivators themselves, these cultivators were all nascent soul cultivators and all of them were outstanding geniuses. Nowadays, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was scarce, and many cultivation methods couldn't be cultivated to the peak. Cultivators' use of spiritual aura was incomparable to that of ancient cultivators. Creating a cultivation method was indeed difficult for ordinary cultivators. Ling Yunhe understood Mo Tiange's surprise very well. He smiled helplessly and said, "That's why I said he's a genius." Seemingly intrigued by this topic, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Daoist Qin isn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so you might not understand the situation there. Southern Zhou country is the territory of Buddhist and Confucian cultivators. The Yushan Academy is the largest academy in Southern Zhou country. Being able to become a professor in this academy isn't just because your cultivation level is high. I really haven't had much contact with Confucian cultivators, so I don't know about the academy's situation. Could it be that professor isn't a title for core formation cultivators? Of course not." Ling Yunhe shook his head. In Southern Zhou country, the academy is a school for Confucian cultivators. Ordinary Confucian aura refining disciples are the lowest level students in the academy. Once they build their foundation, they can become lecturers. Once they form their core formation, they can become assistant lecturers. And once they form their nascent soul, they can become professors. Mo Tiange was stunned. Han Shizhi's only a core formation cultivator, but he's already a professor, correct? Ling Yunhe smiled. Only some publicly recognized geniuses who make contributions to the academy will be granted the title of high level. The reason why Han Shizhi is already a professor when he's only in the core formation realm is because he created a set of mental cultivation techniques for the Yushan Academy. Upon hearing the reason, Mo Tiange sighed and said, "Yunzhong is indeed full of talented people. Not to mention others, the people she met today were all extraordinary. Black Moon Devil Monarch's divine sense was amazing, Han Shizhi was actually such a genius, Yang Qingji, who was silent most of the time at the trade fair, could easily take out so many beast cores, and Ling Yunhe, who was in front of her, had extraordinary strength. Mo Tiange didn't know whether Yuan Kong, Qin Yunzi, and Yong Ryu also had their own unique methods." Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on Mo Tiange. "Fellow Daoist Qin, you don't need to praise others. Just now, when you fought against Han Shizhi, you didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all. With this kind of strength, you can be considered one of the top experts in Yunzhong." At this point he smiled and said, "Sure enough, I didn't misjudge you." Mo Tiange just smiled after hearing Ling Yunhe's praise. Under the moonlight, the two of them were silent for a while. Mo Tiange suddenly asked, "Fellow Daoist Ling, what's going on with the carefree valley you mentioned earlier?" Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment before he regained his composure. With a happy expression, he said, "Fellow Daoist Qin, are you willing to accept my invitation?" Mo Tiange said vaguely, "We'll talk about it later." Ling Yunhe didn't get a definite answer, but he didn't feel disappointed. He quickly regained his composure. His gaze swept around and he said with a smile, "Are we going to talk here?" Mo Tiange was stunned. She apologized, "It's my fault. If you don't mind, fellow Daoist Ling, why don't you come to my small cave?" Ling Yunhe didn't stand on ceremony and nodded happily. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Mo Tiange was a bit speechless. This person really didn't know how to be polite. If it was someone else, even if they immediately agreed, they would at least say a few polite words, right? However, it seemed like he was a magnanimous person, and Mo Tiange happened to like this kind of person. Talking to this kind of person wasn't very tiring because he was smart enough, and because he was magnanimous, she didn't need to make wild guesses. This kind of feeling reminded her of Qin Shi. When he was still senior martial brother Qin, although he had a lot of secrets, he was also smart and magnanimous. She suddenly missed Qin Shi. She wondered if his closed-door meditation was going smoothly. Fellow Daoist Qin? Ling Yunhe, who was about to take a step, saw that Mo Tiange was still standing in the same place, so he turned around and called out in confusion. "Ah." Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. She patted her forehead and smiled at him. "Please." The two of them walked silently until they reached the small cave where Mo Tiange was temporarily staying. Although the spiritual aura in this cave was ordinary, it was well arranged. Moonstones glittered, making it as bright as day. This time, Mo Tiange very politely served him a cup of tea for a guest. Ling Yunhe was very satisfied. This meant that their relationship had taken a step closer, right? After drinking the tea, Ling Yunhe spoke again. "Fellow Daoist Qin, I don't want to pry into why you provoked Han Shizhi, but listen to my advice. You must be careful in the future. This person is narrow-minded and cares a lot about face. If he tripped over you, he'll definitely get it back. He underestimated you this time, but he might not be so lucky next time. Mo Chenga smiled and nodded. Thank you for reminding me, fellow Taoist Ling. I'll be careful. Ling Yunha's gaze shifted, and he continued to smile. However, if fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help me, I'll definitely help you solve Han Shizhi's problem in the future. Mo Chenga was stunned, but when she thought of Ling Yunha's identity, she suddenly understood. Even if Han Shizhi had an extraordinary status in Nanzhou, the person in front of her was one of the candidates for the head of Juyin sect, the biggest cultivation group in Yunzhong. He had a great chance of becoming the head of Juyin sect. With his help, she naturally wouldn't have to worry about Han Shizhi. She raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, fellow Taoist Ling, if I agree to go to Carefree Valley with you, what benefits are you willing to give me? She asked directly, but Ling Yunha was very happy. If fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help, I'll help you with anything you need as long as I can do it. Mo Chenga stared at him and continued to ask, what if I want to get a complete cultivation technique manual from Danxia sect? Ling Yunha was stunned. Cultivation technique manual? Since this matter was already brought up, Mo Chenga simply said, yes. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Ling. I came to Yunzhong this time because I was ordered by my elders to get a cultivation technique manual from Danxia sect. However, fellow Taoist Ling also knows that who would be willing to give a profound cultivation technique to others? I'm unfamiliar with this place and I don't have any friendship with Danxia sect, so it's really a headache for me. Is that so? Ling Yunha pondered for a while, then glanced at Mo Chenga thoughtfully. Presumably, the cultivation technique fellow Taoist Qin is talking about isn't an ordinary cultivation technique, right? Yes. Mo Chenga smiled bitterly. To be honest, I don't have any confidence in this matter and think it's most likely impossible. However, this is my elder's order, so I have to do it. First, tell me what cultivation technique fellow Taoist wants. Ling Yunha thought for a while, then looked at her and said, maybe I really have a way. It's the art of Sunu. Mo Chenga slowly said those 3 words, then looked up at Ling Yunha. I wonder if fellow Taoist Ling has heard of it? The art of Sunu. Ling Yunha muttered as if he was recalling something. All of a sudden he stared at Mo Chenga with a sharp gaze. The art of Sunu cultivated by pure Yin female cultivators? Yes. Mo Chenga's expression was still calm. Several thousand years ago, my ancestor was a cultivator in Yunzhong. He once heard that Danxia sect had an art of Sunu cultivated by female cultivators with pure Yin constitution. Chapter 368. For a while neither of them spoke and fell into silence. Ling Yunha held his teacup and stared at her for a while. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while he finally couldn't help but ask, fellow Taoist Qin, what do you want this technique for? After saying that, he felt it was inappropriate, so he added, if it's not convenient, you don't have to answer. Mo Chenga glanced at him with a faint smile and shook her head. Sorry, it's really not convenient to answer. Ling Yunha nodded and didn't say anything. He was just asking casually and didn't expect to get an answer. Who would answer this question? Pure Yin constitution. If a female cultivator with a pure Yin constitution existed in this world, how big of a storm would it set off in Yunzhong? The nascent soul cultivators had already reached the peak of cultivation in the mortal world, so they might not have any thoughts about it. However, the core formation cultivators definitely wouldn't let them go. Even he himself was shaken when he thought of this, and it took him a long time to calm himself down. However, he didn't think of Mo Chenga as the reason. How could a female cultivator with a pure Yin constitution wander the world at will? Not to mention to say it out loud so frankly. If he knew that Mo Chenga wasn't the only one who did this, and that Mo Yaoqing also ran amok in Yunzhong thousands of years ago, he would probably be so shocked that his jaw would drop. In a way, Mo Chenga not only inherited Mo Yaoqing's pure Yin constitution, but she also inherited her courage. Ling Yunha put this thought behind him and thought carefully. If fellow Taoist Qin is sure that this technique is in Danxia sect, I can find a way to get it. Mo Chenga's eyes brightened when she got a definite answer. If fellow Taoist Ling is willing to help me, I'll do my best to help Carefree Valley. Ling Yunha was stunned for a moment, then he showed a happy expression. Okay, it's settled then. After that, Ling Yunha talked about the Carefree Valley without holding anything back, not leaving out any details. Since Mo Chenga didn't agree before, Ling Yunha naturally left some leeway. Since they formed an alliance this time, he had to be honest about some things. Carefree Valley wasn't simple. It was indeed a blessed place in Yunzhong in ancient times, but now, it was full of evil miasma, so it wasn't easy to enter. There were also some strange demonic beasts. Although they were core formation cultivators, they needed at least 5 or 6 people to enter. This was also the reason why Ling Yunhe wanted to invite her. However, after listening to Ling Yunhe for a while, Mo Chinga realized she actually didn't suffer any losses. This was because Carefree Valley was a secluded place, and Yunzhong's cultivators couldn't go there whenever they wanted. Although the miasma had reappeared, there were still some treasures left behind from the ancient times. As long as he could obtain even one, it would not be a loss. As for the worryless fruit that Ling Yunhe wanted, Mo Chinga didn't covet it at all. She had the spiritual attraction bead and did not lack pills. Although the effects of the pills were not as good as the fretless fruit, they were not too far off. If she helped Ling Yunhe obtain the worryless fruit, not only would she not have to worry about the art of Sunu, but she would also have Ling Yunhe to help her deal with Han Shiji, the enemy she'd inadvertently made. It could be said that as long as she wasn't too unlucky, she would definitely profit from this deal. After a rough agreement, Ling Yunhe made an appointment to talk with her later and left. Mo Chinga stayed outside for a while. She restored the defensive formation, then entered the virtual sky world. As soon as he entered the virtual sky world, a golden light rushed over. "Master." It was a tender voice. Mo Chinga knew it was Feifei without saying. But she also knew that the current Feifei wasn't the Feifei from before. In the past, the one who rushed over was acting coquettishly, but this one was most likely a disaster. Therefore, she took the opportunity to hug it and threw it across the room. This self-proclaimed divine beast Feifei knew how to enjoy life better than she did, so it insisted on sitting on the praying mat. If she threw it everywhere like before, it would definitely protest. "I'm telling you, if you want clear sky pills, you can't get them anymore. Do you think they're sugar pills? What if you eat them carelessly and cause problems?" Feifei rolled on the praying mat across from her and raised its head. "Who said I want clear sky pills? I'm not stupid. I haven't finished eating them last time." Mo Chinga cast a glance at it and poured herself a cup of tea. In fact, Feifei's awakening wasn't completely without benefits. For example, she didn't need to make tea by herself now. Those 2 stone sculpture puppets didn't have consciousness, so they couldn't make such good tea. Moreover, she had someone to chat with. Feifei was smart enough to understand everything and even gave her ideas. Oh, the tea's fragrance was refreshing. A divine beast was indeed a divine beast. It really knew how to enjoy life. "Then what do you want to do? Can't I just say hello?" Feifei blinked its round eyes. It used to be very cute when it did this, but now Mo Chinga only felt it was treacherous. She suddenly missed the old Feifei. Although it only knew how to eat and couldn't cook, it was still pleasing to the eye and cute. After thinking for a while, she turned around and asked, "Where's Xiaohua? Why don't you go play with them? What's so fun about it?" Feifei's head fell on the tea table. "One can't talk and the other is stupid to death. Master, what kind of spiritual beast did you find?" "Too vicious." Mo Chinga glared at it. "You didn't know how to talk and were stupid to death before." "That's the past," Feifei said disdainfully. "When you were a baby, you still needed people to serve you." Mo Chinga stared at the sky for a while and said helplessly, "Feifei, aren't you a divine beast? Why do you talk like a loafer in the mortal world? Shouldn't divine beasts from the distant past be ignorant of the mortal world and live in a place like paradise? Even if their temperaments weren't very gentle, they shouldn't be this treacherous, right?" Feifei curled its lips and said, "We used to live together with humans." Feifei raised its head and stared at her. "You don't know?" Mo Chinga indeed didn't know. Only a few words were left about how people lived in the distant past era, and what was recorded in ancient books was only a legend. Feifei raised its head and said slowly, "At that time we spirits and humans lived together. There weren't that many cultivators and there weren't that many disputes. It was very happy." Yearning slowly appeared in its eyes. That was an era that was also very far away from it. Although it had some memories, it wasn't a spiritual beast from that era after all. "Master," Feifei said after a pause, "I've been thinking for a long time these past few days, and I think there's something wrong with this world." Mo Chinga put down the teacup and found that Feifei's gaze was very serious. It stared at Mo Chinga and said, "From ancient times until now, spirits and demons have been separated. Although the human world has been a long time and there must have been great changes, it shouldn't have become like this. I don't remember much, but many things nowadays are very different from ancient times and even completely opposite. This isn't normal." Mo Chinga didn't doubt that Feifei had enough wisdom. It had awakened. Although it didn't have the strength of a divine beast, its intelligence wouldn't be reduced. However, she didn't know what to say about this conclusion. She was only a core formation cultivator, and her strength to explore the origin of the world was still too low. Seeing that Emochenga didn't know what to say, Feifei sighed and lowered its head. I know you don't understand. Forget it. Let's talk about it when you advance to the nascent soul realm. At that time, you should understand what I mean. Ever since it advanced, Feifei had always looked sly, but now Emochenga felt that its expression was full of melancholy. She could understand Feifei's feelings. It inherited its ancestors' memory but lived in the abandoned human world, so it must feel very lonely. However, this kind of loneliness was something she couldn't do anything about right now. Power and realm, these things even determine the height of one's thoughts. She said, advancing to the nascent soul realm isn't something that can be done in a day or two. If you just feel bored, you can talk to me about it, although I might not necessarily understand. Feifei propped its head on the table and looked at her. It still looked as cute as before, but the feeling it gave off was completely different. After a while, it said, although you're not a good master, at least you're a good person. Emochenga glared at it. How am I not a good master? I'll give you whatever I have. Where else can you find a master like me? Why didn't it think about how it advanced? Feifei stretched its limbs, then tilted its head and said, you're talking about these spiritual panaceas? You can't use so many by yourself, and they came from nowhere. If you don't give them to us to eat, you'd be too stingy. Emochenga was speechless. But on second thought, Feifei was right. The reason she was so generous was because she had too many, and it was too easy for her to obtain them. If she was really like those cultivators who obtained some spiritual panaceas with great difficulty, would she be willing to give them to eat? Before she built her foundation, she wasn't even interested in raising spiritual beasts because she knew she couldn't keep them alive. However, if you didn't have this kind of fated chance, we wouldn't be where we are today. Feifei's gaze passed through the bamboo house and looked at the medicinal field in the distance. You humans are really smart. To open up such an independent space, you need a great divine power that can shatter the void and some wonderful little tricks. Even the outstanding divine beasts like us, the 4 symbols and 5 spirits, can't do it. No wonder God left the human world to you. Emochenga was moved. You said the human world now is very different from ancient times, and God left the human world to us humans. Do you know God's intention? Feifei blinked and tilted its head. Is God something we can reach? Stop asking stupid questions. She was ridiculed by her spiritual beast. Emochenga touched her nose. Then why did you say it's unusual? Because the human world is changing, but some rules shouldn't be changed, Feifei said. God left this world and divided the devil spirit realm, the immortal realm, and the devil realm to leave the human world to humans. But now, there are only humans in the human world, so many rules are completely different from before. Rules? What do you mean? It's God's righteousness. Feifei stroked the golden fur on its body. Don't ask me. I can't explain it clearly now. Teach me how to read these words first. I need you humans' ancient books and records to understand the current world. All right. Emochenga also knew that even if Feifei told her, she wouldn't really understand it now. The problem was there such an arrogant spiritual beast? From the beginning to the end, it was ordering its master around. Chapter 369. Since Feifei could speak, its intelligence wasn't lower than that of humans, so Emochenga had nothing to worry about. She gave it a lot of ancient books to study. As for herself, she was preparing to go out. Since she agreed to help Ling Yunhe, she had to do her best. She wasn't afraid of taking risks, but she always cherished her life. Ling Yunhe was a practical person. Within a few days, he brought her some necessities for this trip to Carefree Valley, as well as some information about Carefree Valley. Carefree Valley was a secret place. Few people in Yunzhong knew its exact location, but he told her the map of Carefree Valley and the situation there so frankly. His behavior was quite pleasing to Emochenga. Because of this, she was more willing to go on this trip. Working with people she liked, even if it was dangerous, made her feel carefree. After familiarizing herself with these situations, another half a month passed. The companions that Ling Yunhe mentioned finally gathered together and sent a letter to invite her over. Leaving her temporary cave, she went straight to the Ling clan's mansion at the top of White Stone Mountain according to Ling Yunhe. The Ling clan's mansion was located at the top of White Stone Mountain, occupying the best spirit veins in Sky Snow City. Emochenga walked up the mountainside without any obstructions. When she reached the top, she couldn't help but stop and praise it. If Sky Snow City was a city of white snow, then the Ling clan's mansion was an ice palace. It occupied an area of several hundred square kilometers. Towering pavilions stretched as far as the eye could see, and all of them were made of glittering and translucent white stone. This white stone was different from the white stone of other buildings in Sky Snow City. It was slightly transparent, and just by looking at it, one could feel a trace of cold air coming from it. There was indeed air on it, but it was spiritual aura. Mo Tienga could see that this Ling clan's mansion was probably built using the best quality white stones from Baishir Mountain. Its spirit-gathering effect wasn't inferior to that of ordinary spirit-gathering formations. It was countless times better than the so-called spirit stone houses in Sky Snow City. This Ling clan was indeed a famous clan. Before she reached the door, a low-level cultivator came to greet her. "Senior, you're here. This way, please." Mo Tienga stared at him and was surprised. "Aren't you, Xiaoshen?" This person was the low-level cultivator who guided her when she rented the cave. "Senior, you still remember me?" Xiaoshen was pleasantly surprised. Then he scratched his head and smiled shyly. "Junior knows Senior, so second uncle specially asked Junior to run errands and pick you up." "Oh, I see." Mo Tienga nodded, then followed him into Ling clan's mansion. "Is everyone else here?" she asked casually. Xiaoshen said as he led the way, "Senior, are you talking about second uncle's friends?" "We're all here. We're just waiting for you." "Is that so?" Mo Tienga asked casually. "Who are those people?" Xiaoshen looked embarrassed and said, "This? Senior, you should wait for my second uncle to introduce you. I don't have the qualifications to meet these seniors." He was only an insignificant aura-refining cultivator, not some genius disciple. Normally he was just a runner in the clan. How could he have the qualifications to receive core formation cultivators? Letting him pick up Mo Tienga today was already an exception. Mo Tienga didn't mind. She nodded casually and followed Xiaoshen through the complicated pavilions. After a while, they finally arrived in front of a small independent building. Before the two of them could approach, 4 foundation building female cultivators came to greet them. They asked respectfully, "Is Senior Qin Wei here?" Xiaoshen had finished his task, so he stood respectfully to the side. Mo Tienga looked at the 4 foundation building female cultivators and said neither hurriedly nor slowly, "I'm Qin Wei." Upon hearing her affirmative answer, the 4 foundation building female cultivators immediately stepped aside and bowed. "Greetings to Senior Qin. My master ordered us to come and welcome Senior." If she was an ordinary person, she would have been fooled by Ling Yunhe's ostentation. These 4 female cultivators were beautiful, graceful, and their cultivation levels weren't bad, but they were trained to be so obedient. Coming to welcome a guest like this not only didn't neglect the guest but also made people feel the master was extraordinary. This move was indeed brilliant. Unfortunately, Mo Tienga was used to this. Although the 16 maids by Lord Daoist Jinghe's side had a lot of small problems, in terms of beauty and temperament, they were much better than these 2 female cultivators. In front of outsiders, they were also well-mannered, gentle, and elegant. It had to be said that although Ling Yunhe knew how to enjoy himself, he was still a junior in the end and couldn't compare to an old monster like Lord Daoist Jinghe. Therefore, she just glanced at the 4 people faintly and nodded. That being the case, lead the way. The spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator inadvertently spread out, so the 4 foundation building female cultivators didn't dare to neglect her. 2 of them walked in front and the other 2 followed behind, respectfully inviting her into the building. As soon as she stepped into the small building, someone immediately came to greet her with a smile. "Fellow Daoist Qin, you're here." Mo Tienga looked up and saw that the person who greeted her was Ling Yunhe. At this moment, Ling Yunhe was even more graceful than he had been in the past few days. The first time she saw him, he looked like a downtrodden cultivator. The second time she saw him, he was neatly dressed and had an imposing appearance. This time, however, he looked refreshed and elegant. Mo Tienga couldn't help but imagine what he would look like the next time she saw him. She let her imagination run wild, but on the surface she still politely returned Ling Yunhe's greeting. "Fellow Daoist Ling, I came as promised. May I know what's next?" "Oh." Ling Yunhe immediately took over the conversation. "Fellow Daoist Qin, these are my friends. I'll introduce them to you first." Mo Tienga followed his line of sight and saw 4 cultivators sitting in the hall. She couldn't help but be stunned. These 4 cultivators were all in the core formation realm, 2 were in the middle stage and the other 2 were in the early stage, just like Ling Yunhe said. However, what surprised her was that there was actually an acquaintance among them. It was the devil cultivator Yang Qingji whom she met at the tea house in Sky Snow City that day. This is my good friend of many years. His surname is Tian, and his name is Jiqian. He's a cultivator from Five Elements Valley who specializes in the Tao of formations and rarely goes out. Ling Yunhe pointed at a middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him to Mo Tiange. The cultivator stood up and saluted Mo Tiange. I'm Tian Jiqian. Greetings to fellow Daoist Qin. Mo Tiange returned his salute with a smile. Fellow Daoist Tian. Judging from Tian Jiqian's appearance, he looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He looked gentle and delicate, and his whole body was clean and tidy. His clothes were very simple. If it wasn't for the momentum he exuded, she wouldn't be able to guess that this young man with a harmless smile on his face was a middle-stage core formation cultivator. Mo Tiange noticed that his fingers were especially fair and clean, and his nails were trimmed just right. Apparently he studied formations a lot on a daily basis. Fiddling with formation props was a delicate job, and all formation masters had very nimble fingers. This fellow Taoist's name is Tian Can. He's an individual cultivator. Ling Yunhe pointed at another middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him. Mo Tiange looked at him. This was a very thin and weak man dressed in black. His face was covered with a black scarf, and even his hands were wrapped in black cloth. He was also wearing a conical bamboo hat. His dressing was very similar to Yang Qingji's, but he didn't have the devil aura on his body. Fellow Taoist Tian Can. She greeted this person with a smile. This person just slightly opened his eyes, nodded at her, and cupped his hands slightly as a greeting. Then he closed his eyes and lowered his head again, looking like he didn't want to talk to her. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe smiled at Mo Tiange and said, "This fellow Taoist Tian Can doesn't like to talk. Fellow Taoist Qin, please don't take offense." Mo Tiange nodded to show she understood, then looked at the next person. This is Brother Yang. His name is Qingji and he's from Northern Qilin Nation. He's the direct disciple of Guifang Devil Monarch. His devil art is very outstanding, and ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators aren't his match. Guifang Devil Monarch? Mo Tiange asked softly. Ling Yunhe slapped his forehead, shook his head and said with a smile, I forgot. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't from Yunzhong, so you don't know these things. Guifang Devil Monarch is one of the 3 great devil monarchs in Yunzhong. He advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm several hundred years ago, and his name shook Yunzhong. He rarely has a match. This Brother Yang is his only direct disciple. Although Mo Tiange hadn't heard of the 3 great devil monarchs, since Ling Yunhe said he rarely had a match in Yunzhong, and his cultivation level was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, he should be someone like Master Songfeng, right? In that case, as his only direct disciple, Yang Qingji's identity was quite extraordinary. It was no wonder he didn't introduce his background at the tea table that day. Presumably, in Yunzhong, the 3 words Yang Qingji had already explained his identity. Fellow Taoist Yang, we meet again. She curled up the corners of her mouth and saluted Yang Qingji. The 2 of them had dealt with each other and exchanged goods, so Yang Qingji was a bit more polite than last time. He stood up and saluted back. Fellow Taoist Qin. Upon seeing this, Ling Yunhe was a bit surprised. You've already met? Mo Tiange smiled and said, we met once at the tea table, but at that time I didn't know fellow Taoist Yang's identity was extraordinary. Right after she finished speaking, Yang Qingji said with a wooden expression, I'm just an ordinary devil cultivator. How could I be extraordinary? Fellow Taoist Qin doesn't need to praise me. His words were really blunt. If people who didn't know him heard it, they might think he was arrogant and difficult to get along with. However, Mo Tiange could hear that he didn't want others to treat her differently because of her master's name, which gave her a better impression of him. She didn't get angry and apologized to Yang Qingji. I made a slip of the tongue. Fellow Taoist Yang, please don't take offense. Although she apologized, her tone was very indifferent and didn't seem to have any intention of flattering him. Upon hearing this, Yang Qingji politely saluted her again. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to be so polite. The interaction between the 2 of them was witnessed by everyone else. Astonishment flashed in Ling Yunhe's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He then introduced the last person to Mo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin, this is my clan brother Ling Yunfei. This person's age was similar to Ling Yunhe's, and their faces were indeed a bit similar. However, he looked a bit arrogant and unruly like a teenager, lacking a bit of maturity. As soon as Mo Tiange saw him, she knew he was a proud and arrogant descendant of an aristocratic family. Fortunately, Ling Yunfei was still polite to her. He stood up and saluted her. "Fellow Taoist Qin, I've heard a lot about you." "Fellow Taoist Yunfei is too polite. Where did I get my name?" Mo Chenga said modestly and saluted him back. Ling Yunfei stared at her without blinking. "These days, I've heard from my second brother that fellow Taoist Qin has a profound cultivation level and a steady character. What's rare is that you're also very young and beautiful. I didn't believe him, but now that I've seen you, I know what he said is true." These words were indeed praising her, but Ling Yunfei's gaze was a bit too passionate. Mo Chenga couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. In the past, when she was still an aura refining or foundation building cultivator, how could other cultivators praise her like this? Now she was already in the core formation realm. Among core formation cultivators, female cultivators were really rare, so she seemed to stand out from the crowd. "That's enough," Ling Yunhe promptly said. "Let's get to know each other. From now on we'll be companions on this trip to Carefree Valley." Chapter 370. The six people saluted each other and sat down. Mo Chenga found that the six of them had one thing in common: they all looked very young. Tian Jichin, who looked the oldest, was only about 30 years old, while the others looked like they were in their early 20s. This wasn't strange. Ling Yunhe was only about 100 years old, and he was a disciple of a famous sect. Juyin sect's outstanding disciple caught his attention, so he wouldn't be too inferior. Ling Yunhe sat in the host's seat and said, "Everyone, I'm the initiator of this trip to Carefree Valley, so I probably know more about Carefree Valley than you do. So, I'll be the leader of this trip. Do you have any objections?" His tone was calm and his speech was neither fast nor slow. He didn't seem overbearing, but he was full of confidence. Mo Chenga thought it was no wonder Ling Yunhe was listed as a candidate for the head of Juyin sect. Not only was his cultivation level outstanding, but his behavior was also outstanding. What was rare was that he acted calmly but also seemed magnanimous. He felt that his seat should be his, so he didn't refuse politely. However, she didn't know this person's temperament. If he didn't have evil intentions, they could be friends. Tian Jichin smiled and said, "Of course. This trip is for Brother Ling, so of course Brother Ling will be the leader." Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. He just sat in his seat, spinning the teacup in his hand and looking up from time to time. Of course he didn't have any objections. This was Ling Yunhe's business and also the Ling family's business. Ling Yunhe once said that because of the conflict between the sect and the family's interests, it wasn't convenient for him to invite acquaintances. However, he invited Ling Yunfei, which showed that Ling Yunfei was someone he could really trust. Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on the other three people. Yang Qingji said, "I have no objections." Mo Chenga smiled faintly, which could be considered an answer. The black-masked Tian can just opened his eyes slightly, then closed them again. Since no one has any objections, this matter is settled. Ling Yunhe paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the five people seated before he slowly said, "I'm sure all of you know what kind of place the Carefree Valley is. With our strength, it won't be difficult for us to escape unscathed after we enter. However, if we don't work together, it's very possible that we'll perish in the Carefree Valley. Hence, I hope that all of you can guarantee that once we enter the Carefree Valley, all of you will listen to my instructions." At this point he smiled and added, "I can also guarantee that I will put your lives first." Tian Jichin and Ling Yunfei nodded in agreement, but Tian Kan and Mo Chenga didn't say anything. Only Yang Qingji's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, "As long as fellow Taoist Ling doesn't break his promise, there will naturally be no problem." Ling Yunhe nodded and smiled. "As for whether or not we can find the carefree fruit, it all depends on our luck. Even if I can't find it, I will still abide by our previous agreement. I will fulfill all the conditions that I promised everyone. I trust Brother Ling's character," Tian Jichin said first. The others didn't have any objections. Mo Chenga wondered what kind of price Ling Yunhe paid to invite these people. If she was alone, although she didn't need any treasures or spirit stones, those two things wouldn't be easy to do. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe said, "That being the case, let's discuss the plan for this trip." Although it was called a discussion, in fact he was the only one talking. Ling Yunfei occasionally interjected, and the others just asked some questions that interested them. Ling Yunhe was very well prepared. He had prepared the route, talismans, medicinal pills and so on. He told everyone the rough route and how to deal with some matters. After that, he distributed some necessary small items to them. Mo Chenga looked around. There were some detoxification medicinal pills, sound-transmitting talismans, protective talismans, and the map that Ling Yunhe had prepared for each of them. Mo Chenga felt a little relieved. Seeing that Ling Yunhe handled things in an orderly manner, this trip should be safe. After spending about 2 hours explaining the plan, Ling Yunhe asked, "Does anyone have any questions?" Everyone shook their heads. He even considered some unexpected situations, so he couldn't think of anything to ask now. As for the rest, they could only act according to the circumstances. That being the case, let's determine the time of departure. Do you have anything else to deal with? After Ling Yunhe asked, Tian Can, who hadn't spoken since the beginning, opened his eyes and said, "I still have something to do. I need 2 days. Mo Chenga frowned slightly. This Tiansan's voice was hoarse like a sharp thorn, which was very uncomfortable to listen to. Ling Yunhe nodded slightly and asked, "What about the other fellow Taoists? If you have something to deal with, please deal with it quickly. We don't have much time left." Mo Chenga had already inquired about it. The Juyin sect's head selection had been prepared for more than a year, and the final day would be in 2 months. Because of the internal strife in the Ling clan, Ling Yunhe was confirmed to be the candidate several months ago. After returning from Carefree Valley, he had to adjust his condition, so he really didn't have much time left. The others shook their heads. There was no need to mention Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei. Yang Qingji had been in Sky Snow City for several days, so he must have finished his business. Mo Chenga didn't have anything important to do now, so she could leave at any time. "Then we'll leave in 3 days. Is there any problem?" This time even Tiankin shook his head. Seeing that no one had any objections, Ling Yunhe said, "Good." 3 days later at the same time, "Let's gather here. What do you think?" Everyone agreed. Then they left. Tian Jiqian, Yang Qingji, and the others stayed in the Ling mansion. Only Mo Chenga and Tiankan left the Ling mansion one after another. Just as she was about to return to her cave to continue meditating, a fierce momentum suddenly swept from behind. Mo Chenga leaned to one side and the fierce momentum brushed past. A white stone not far from her made a loud boom sound and shattered into powder. At that moment, Mo Chenga flipped her hand, and the heaven and earth fan appeared in her hand. She waved it lightly to block the next spiritual aura attack. Like a flash of lightning, she floated several hundred feet away in an instant. The attacker exclaimed in surprise. Although the art of teleportation could be said to be one of the most basic spells for core formation cultivators, there were still differences in skill. Ordinary teleportation could only cover a distance of about 100 feet, and the distance Mo Chenga teleported to was already considered extremely far. But in the next moment, the attacker immediately chased after her and ruthlessly attacked her with another spiritual aura attack. This person's attack technique was very simple. He didn't use magic weapons or any fancy tricks. He just used all the spiritual aura in his body to meet force with force. Mo Chenga didn't even have time to breathe a sigh of relief when she felt the fierce momentum pressing down on her again. She was a bit annoyed. She didn't provoke anyone, so why was this person so relentless? She no longer held back. She waved the white silk handkerchief to protect herself. Then she fumbled in her Qingquan bag and took out the spirit cloud's rui, smashing it towards the attacker. Boom. This loud noise was even louder than the previous one. The attacker quickly retreated, but he still didn't have time to get out of the attack range. With a muffled groan, he was hit by the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit cloud's rui and fell down. But he quickly steadied himself. He raised his hand and a small shield appeared in front of him. This shield was obviously a high-grade magic weapon. It emitted a sparkling blue light and instantly protected him. Mo Chenga withdrew the spirit cloud's rui and didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, she stared at the person in front of her and asked with a frown, "Fellow Taoistan, and what's the meaning of this?" The person who attacked her from behind was Tian Can, who was having a gathering with them just now. When the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit cloud's rui stabilized, Tian Can waved his hand and removed the shield. He stared at Mo Chenga. His fierce momentum gradually disappeared. He cupped his hands and saluted her, then said in a harsh voice, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you're very skillful." ******. Upon hearing this, Mo Chenga understood that she was being tested. Although Qiansan's attack was fierce, he didn't intend to kill her, so he didn't use his magic weapon. But this person was obviously a martial cultivator. Such fierce aura definitely couldn't be possessed by other cultivators. Her companions this time were really interesting. She, Ling Yunhe and Ling Yunfei were Taoist law cultivators. Tian Jichin was also a Taoist law cultivator, but he was a formation master. Yang Qingji was a devil cultivator, and Tian Kan was a martial cultivator. Mo Chinga said, "Fellow Taoist Tian Kan, you didn't use your magic weapon, but you fought me with your aura alone. Your means are extraordinary." Tian Kan was wrapped in black clothes and wore a bamboo hat on his head. Only a pair of half-closed eyes could be seen on his body, and no expression could be seen on his face. He looked at Mo Chinga and said flatly, "I'm a martial cultivator. Why would I need a magic weapon in a fight of magical powers? A loss is a loss. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to give me face." Although what he said was reasonable, he didn't use his weapon, so he didn't use his full strength. Of course, Mo Chinga also didn't use her full strength, so she just said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Tiankan, do you have anything else to say? If not, I'll take my leave first." Tian Kan was stunned. Seeing that she wasn't interested in him, he had no choice but to leave. "I'm going to take care of my business. Fellow Taoist Qin will meet again." Mo Chinga cupped her hands at him and left without saying anything. When she was far away, Tian Kan sighed, chose the path down the mountain and walked away. At that moment Mo Chinga stopped. She turned around and stared at Tiansan's back with a frown, lost in thought. What's this Tiansan's background? Did he suddenly test her out of curiosity, or did he have some other intentions? In terms of fights of magical powers, she had a lot of treasures now, so she wasn't afraid of him. However, on this trip to Carefree Valley he was her companion. If he had any ulterior motives, wouldn't it be dangerous? Fellow Taoist Qin. Just as she was thinking, someone called her from behind. Mo Chinga turned around and saw Ling Yunhe standing not far from her. He looked pensive as he stared at the scene of devastation not far from them. "Fellow Taoist Ling?" Ling Yunhe shifted his gaze, smiled at her, and pointed at the place where they fought just now. "Fellow Taoist, you're very skillful. White spirit stones are very hard, but they were unexpectedly damaged by you." Tiansan's strike turned a huge white stone into powder, and Mo Chinga's spirit cloud's Rui also blasted a huge hole in the ground. Mo Chinga smiled and said apologetically, "I'm really sorry. I damaged this place." "Hey." Ling Yunhe waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, why are you so polite? I'm not such a petty person. I'm just amazed by your amazing divine powers." "Fellow Taoist Ling, you flatter me." Mo Chinga didn't really take it seriously. But since she was in someone else's territory, she still had to be polite. She asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you chase after me?" Ling Yunhe shook his head and said with a smile, "I just heard some noise and came out to take a look. If fellow Taoist Qin wants to go back and rest, I won't disturb you." Mo Chinga smiled and said, "Since that's the case, I'll take my leave first." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.